Okay, so it says we're live. Hello, folks. If you're watching this video broadcast, once again, it is Lee and myself. Tom is away. We have not begun the actual official audio version of the recording yet because we want to test if my silly video feed is working. So again, it is welcome to behind the scenes of AV Rant very shortly before we begin the program. I'm going to be checking on my phone via LTE to see if my video feed is working. Because that way I'm not mixing up from my Wi-Fi or...
Well, if you do get the video feed on your phone, you should hold it up to your webcam and create some sort of weird video feedback loop and the internet will explode.
That's right. There it is. Okay, so that's me. It's a little bit behind, but it looks good. It looks like we're live, so I will shut up myself on my phone.
And I will check my last text from my mother. And she can't get to my wish list on Amazon. Now that is a problem.
Christmas is bad. Coming up.
Uh-oh. Well, I'll answer her back later, but that's pretty serious. I got to figure that out.
Alrighty. Well, we're going to have a few seconds of silence here, and then we will get into the podcast. I'll make sure I have my topic list open and ready. If you have yours.
Check. Wait a minute. I'm having an issue.
Uh-oh. You see, this is why we do this.
Check. 1, 2. Oh, okay. All right.
Showing up in your own recording?
Yeah, something was weird. I seem to be recording, but it's not acting in a manner that it should. It's looking weird. And maybe it's just a visual thing, a video driver thing or something. It seems to be recording, but I'm a little nervous.
Well, we have the YouTube video. If all else fails, I can always pull the audio from that. So
okay. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Why would it do this to me?
I don't know, Lee.
Check. Well, I mean, it's bouncing and it is showing me a waveform, but it's not moving along neatly with like it's supposed to.
Do you want to stop your recording and see? Because we can always begin our audio recording again.
Oh, man, sorry. Yeah, let's do it. I just want to make sure because it's never
this is
done.
Awesome video for the people watching it. Yeah, no, go ahead, check your own audio, make sure it's working. That is more important.
Okay, then let me file new. Hey, let's just close this file because that just I don't know about that. Save changes. No. File new. It just wasn't acting right. The meters weren't bouncing as I expected.
I hear you, man. We want to make sure it works.
Yeah, we don't want to screw this up. Check 1, 2. Okay. You want to tell me when or should I just hit it?
If you just say 1, 2, 3 pop, then I can sync myself in with my recording.
Okay. Well, I'll do that. 1, 2, 3 pop.
Pop.
Howdy. Now we're acting normally.
All right, good stuff. Okay, so we'll go a few seconds of silence, and then we'll begin the show. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. My name is Rob H., and this week I am here with...
Lee Overstreet, the occasional substitute teacher.
That's right. Eagle-eyed and eagle-eared listeners and viewers among us will notice that Tom Andry, the associate editor of Audioholics, is not here this week. He is away on a camping trip. As one does over Thanksgiving, apparently, in the bitter cold.
I was about to say, that's not my kind of thing. Well,
he's in Florida. It's not cold there.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Well, I'm in Alabama. It's not too bad here. I think we'll be probably 15 or 16 Celsius as the high tomorrow.
Alrighty. Celsius. Wow. You went for the world crowd.
Hey, I've decided to convert unilaterally.
That's right. That's the one thing. Temperature is the one thing that people who use Fahrenheit, it's not an easy conversion in one.
No, it's not, because it's going to be like lower 60s or something like that tomorrow Fahrenheit, and that just sort of makes more sense. But whatever, I'm trying really hard. I've also been going for length and distances too. I'm trying to do meters.
Centimeters. All right. Well, this is not the Celsius and centimeters show. This is AV Rant. It is your home theater and AV questions answered. We take your questions on all things related to home theater and audio video, and we attempt to answer them. And normally we have, like I said, Tom Andry, the associate editor of Audioholics, here to do that along with myself. But we're joined by Lee Overstreet this week, who is once again pinch hitting on short notice. We had a couple of other guys, our producer Austin, who was not able to join us tonight. Sorry. And I got in touch with Ray Coronado, but he is stuck at work, so this is
like the thing where the president is killed somehow, and then the vice president also, and then you go to
No, that's not. You're the vice president.
No, I'm like president pro tem of the Senate or something. I'm like maybe like the fourth.
Well, naturally, Austin has been elevated now as he is our producer, so we always try to have him on the show every week, but it doesn't always work out. But to get into the show a little bit, we have what we call our listeners of the week. These are people who support the podcast in some way. And we want to say thanks, first of all, to Joshua and Sigmund. Those two gentlemen were kind enough to come to avrant.com. That's our website. And over on the right-hand side, there is a support the podcast, buy us a cup of coffee link that takes you to PayPal, where you can either use your PayPal account, or if you don't have a PayPal account, you can just use a credit card to send a donation to the podcast, help support us, pay for our bandwidth and streaming costs and keeping up our website that for some reason eats way more data than it ought to. I have no idea what's going on over there. Yep, that's not mine. Out of my hands. I don't manage that.
Strange.
But it helps. So Joshua, Sigmund, thank you very much. We also like to thank people who support the podcast in other ways. Toby this week bought an SVS PB1000 subwoofer, and he let them know that he heard about them on AV Rant.
Nice.
So we always love that. And James helped us in some very unique ways. First of all, he's helping Tom to acquire a new laptop for recording the podcast.
There you go.
If you have been listening to the show for any length of time, especially in the past recent few episodes, man, Tom's computer is having a difficult time chugging along, and it is making our lives a serious headache. So if James can help Tom acquire a new laptop, that is huge. And also, James saved Christmas for me.
What?
For me. You see, my niece had her eye on some very specific Disney princess dolls, the little like 3-inch dolls with the clip-on dresses, the little plastic clip-on dresses.
You're saying that as if I'm going to go, yes, I know the ones you're talking about.
Of course you do. Who wouldn't? Yeah, well, no, this is like a very specific set that came with like teeny tiny little handbags and stuff. They stopped making this specific set in 2012, but she saw the video of it on YouTube and went ape for it. So I tracked it down, but the only place that was selling it would not ship to Canada. They will only ship within the United States. So since James lives very close to the Canadian border, he's like, hey, send it to me. I'll forward it to you. And I'm like, you saved Christmas, James. You saved my niece's Christmas. So
yeah, you can't explain to a kid about why something doesn't exist when they're looking at it. Yeah,
that's right. So as I mentioned, this is a question and answer show. We will get to our questions in just a little bit. We have a whole bunch, but first we're going to do a little bit of news. I wanted to mention one product that I found. It's on pre-order right now, and it's called the SubPack S2 Seat Back Tactile Bass System.
Should I react like Tom would react? With great disdain.
This is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I kind of wanted to have this for when Tom was here, but we're light on news this week, so I threw this in. I don't know how you would attach this to a couch. It doesn't look like it's meant for a couch cushion at all. It looks like it's for a single seat back. It has like a strap that looks like it would go onto like an office chair or something like that.
Right.
But it's basically a backpack-looking unit. It straps onto the back of your seat. It's $379 to pre-order right now. This is the version 2. They had a version 1. But it's a tactile transducer. It's a direct tactile transducer that
it shows a picture of someone wearing it like a backpack.
I know, that was the thing. Well, I think you can, because they talk about it attaching via Bluetooth for one, and via a 3.5 millimeter jack with like a headphone pass through. So like the headphone out jack from your player would go to the headphone in jack on the sub pack, and then there's a headphone out jack from the sub pack to go to your regular headphones. So I think the idea is that you could actually wear this thing.
You can. It shows a guy wearing it.
It looks like it.
He also has a groovy beaded necklace on, so you have to be totally cool to wear this thing. Oh, that's the implication, right?
So it's ergonomically shaped, they claim. And I guess that means it has some little curves to go into the small of your back. It is a tactile transducer, so it thumps away the bass for you.
Now, I'll admit, I would put that on just for giggles.
Just for fun, I know. It's like a personalized tactile transducer.
I mean, you'd look ridiculous, but a giant vibrator strapped to your back, that's a little odd.
There you go. That is almost exactly what is going on there.
Yeah,
so, hey, maybe it'll help work the kinks out of your back if you have
I mean, it might feel great after a long day of yard work or something.
Put on some epic wubs and give yourself a massage. It's only $379. So in lieu of other news, Lee, the last time you were on this show, and I'm dropping this audio a little bit because we didn't have really time to prepare before the podcast. But the last time you were on this show, we talked about your AV receiver going into protection mode.
That's right. And I believe you spoke to someone else about setting their amplifier at 8 ohms. So if you're going to ask me, what have I done?
Yes.
I've done the lazy thing, and I simply switched it to 8 ohms instead of 6. I haven't pulled the thing around to look behind to see if I'm an idiot and there's any cables loose. Because I really just, oh man, you realize how awful I'm going to feel if I pull that thing back and there's a little tiny hair of a wire touching something else?
But the question is, does it work? Have you gone into protection mode since the last time you were on the show?
I have not watched the same things at the same volume levels to give you a scientific answer, but it hasn't happened on the more reasonable levels I've been listening. So I really need to sit down and I haven't had a good chance to watch something I'm really excited about to really crank it. To see what happens. The last time I did that, I had watched Interstellar.
Yes.
And that's pretty exciting and has some crazy low, deep organ notes in the music.
Sustained over a long period of time.
Rumbling. And it's really fun. I mean, it's kind of a really bizarre, twisted, strange sci-fi movie. It's good, though. I like it.
We were a little bit worried because the last time you were here, you said if we did not hear from you, because you said you were going to check the wires, you said if we did not hear from you, that it meant that it was the wires and you would never speak to us again. So I was a little concerned. I saw your posting on Facebook. I knew you were alive.
Yeah, I'm alive. It's okay. No, I just simply haven't checked I haven't checked the one thing that I really need to check to satisfy you. But I did just change that one setting. Nothing's happened yet. So maybe that's it. God, I hope that's it. Because, like, I am so OCD about stuff like that. It would be so embarrassing. It would be so bad. But the other news of mine, by the way, to change the subject to something more positive and kind of fun, it's a very special birthday in my house coming up in a few days.
Okay.
My plasma television is turning 10.
Aw. Well, happy 10th birthday, Plasma TV. You are alone in the world now. You will have no more little brothers or sisters because nobody is making plasma TVs anymore.
That's right. It's like the last born child or something. Right. And just like when parents go, oh, I remember when they were so little, I look back and I think, man, it was so exciting in 2005 to plug in a 50-inch plasma television.
Oh, yeah.
And back then there was only a handful. I think we maybe had like 10, if that, high-def channels when we plugged the thing in, and PBS was one of them. And so many channels had 2 separate feeds. They were actually showing different content on the PBS high-def channel back then. And all the local stations were broadcasting at low power on UHF.
Oh, man.
Remember that?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
I assume that happened in Canada as well. It was a similar technical situation,
Our
right?
whole digital cutover happened like ours was mandated by law. I think it was 2 years after the U.S. one. So our whole transition was
2011 for you then, I guess.
It was a little bit smoother. Yeah. People were the other thing is in Canada there's seemingly fewer people using over the air. Cable is very prevalent. So it was a little bit easier because people were already used to having a cable box, and all they had to do was actually most people could just continue using the same cable box they already had. So our whole digital transition seemed to go a little smoother. I mean, it had the benefit of watching what happened in the States and then waiting a year or two after that before we did.
But down here for the longest time, my friend Nick got into the game first in 2000 with a high-def TV. And at that time, we were calling engineering departments at local stations going, when are you turning on the high-def transmitter? And in 2005, I finally got a TV, and I just kind of looked back, and I remember how much fun that was. Like, I invited my family over, and we just watched, like, some strange Japanese art piece about changing seasons, and it didn't matter what was on the screen because it was so gorgeous and amazing.
And proper widescreen and stuff.
Yeah, don't you kind of miss that? And I remember like there were channels that broadcast like NHD. Remember NHD 1 and 2? Yep. Yeah, we had both of those, and they would just show crazy cool documentaries and random movies and like flyover
whatever
stuff,
they could get their hands on. Well, see, we're going through a somewhat similar transition now with the whole switch over to 4K Ultra HD with high dynamic range. We're going to have our new ATSC 3.0 standard for over-the-air broadcast of all of that. So you'll get to go through it again.
But do you think, I don't think it'll ever be as amazing because for one thing, you'd have to have such an enormous screen to see 4K as different than, 1080p.
Yeah.
And I just don't think it's ever going to be quite that amazing jump where
nothing is ever going to match the switch from black and white to color. I mean, they always make that comparison, but nothing is ever going to match that. And then the switch from standard def to high def was a huge change because, I mean, we also had completely new form factor TVs and you know, I mean, 16:9 instead of 4:3 aspect ratio. So a lot of things changed. So yeah, I mean, going just from HD to Ultra HD, if all it was the resolution bump, that's not going to be a huge thing. But going to a high dynamic range, that
so do you think that I will have friends and family over, they'll sit in front of the 4K TV and go, holy cow, that looks 3D. Like that's the comment I always got 10 years ago this month in December of 2005. Everybody that came over would look at just a nice quality high def picture on the TV and they go, it looks 3D or something. I've never seen anything like it. You know?
I think if we really nail high dynamic range, that's where I think we'll notice that. Because I mean, the slightly sharper image of the higher resolution, probably not. But if we really nail high dynamic range, that's going to have an impact, along with the wider gamut of colors, so we can start to include colors that aren't in the current high definition standard. So yeah, your plasma TV will eventually be replaced by a high dynamic range TV, but that's really not coming for like a year or two. Some of our questions are going to be dealing with that. So, so with that,
and you know, 10 years on, it's still a pretty darn good TV, even though it's the 1366 by 768 at 50 inches in the distance I'm sitting, looks pretty darn good. And all I've done is bump up the brightness and contrast a little bit over the years.
Oh, okay. As it slightly dimmed.
It has slightly dimmed, yes.
They do get slightly dimmer over their lifespan. So yeah, no, it's you can definitely get a lot of use out of it. And that's why it is an odd time that we're in right now, because people are trying to deal with this upcoming transition. And we actually know a little bit further ahead than we probably should as far as what the manufacturers are concerned. They would love us to buy a new TV every 2 years, right?
Of course.
Or every 1 year.
If I had some money, sure.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm trying to decide if I want to hang in there to get an OLED. Because that seems, because I have a viewing angle situation, a very wide, shallow room. And I kind of want that OLED, but I don't know how long before a 60-inch OLED is something like $2,500.
Exactly. Well, we're going to be digging into that because this is the question and answer show, and let's get to it. I want to first let people know how to get their question onto the show. For the 100% sure way, you want to email question@avrant.com. That will go to our producer, Austin. He will make sure it is on our topic list if you email question@avrant.com. You can also email myself, rob@avrant.com directly, and Tom, our usual host, tom@avrant.com. Those will go to us directly. Email all three of us if you want to make sure all three of us see it. You can also reach us on Facebook. That is facebook.com/AV Podcast. We're pretty good about seeing messages over there and usually getting to you within the week that we see it posted. You can also reach us on Twitter. I am at First Reflect. That's FIRSTREFLECT. Tom is at AV Rant _Tom.
Underscore.
With the underscore. That's right. At AV Rant _Tom. Our producer is at Austin Pond. He spells his first name with an E, not an I, so it is Austin.
Austin, yeah.
And Lee, I know folks can reach you on Twitter as well.
That's right. You can use at Lee Overtweet.
Overtweet.
Isn't that clever?
Not overtweet, overtweet, Lee overtweet. Right. All right. And of course, the website is avrant.com, where you can come and see all the show notes anytime we mention links or videos or things like that, products like that sub pack that we talked about. If you want to find the links, you'll find them at avrant.com. And of course, you can support the podcast there too. So let's jump in with some comments first, things that aren't questions, but some of our listeners like to forward us information. Like Ilongo, he heard us discussing the issue of 4K displays that do not have HDCP 2.2.
And what's the new feature there?
HDCP 2.2 is the new copy protection for external Ultra HD sources. These are going to be like your Roku 4, your Amazon Fire TV, your upcoming Ultra HD Blu-ray player when those launch in the new year. So external sources that have to plug into your 4K display with an HDMI plug, they need this new copy protection, which is HDCP 2.2. And some 4K displays that you might have bought in 2013 or 2014, they did not have that copy protection on their HDMI ports. They can accept the 4K resolution, they just don't have the copy protection part of it. So,
so what would happen? Would you get a black screen?
You would probably get 1080p. That's the idea.
Oh.
The idea is that if you don't have the copy protection, it down reses it to 1080p. You don't get to see the full 4K, but you hopefully won't see just a black screen, although that's not impossible.
But your TV is only 60 inches, so you'll never notice anyway.
There could be that, but I mean, it would stink because you bought a TV 1 or 2 years ago. You bought something that said 4K on it, and you're thinking, hey, I should be able to play 4K content. Right. Well, he's saying there is potentially a solution if you have one of these displays that does not have HDCP 2.2. The other thing is there's quite a few 4K displays you can buy that have HDCP 2.2, but only on 1 or 2 of their HDMI ports. Some of them have like 4 HDMI inputs, but only one of them has HDCP 2.2, and the other 3 HDMI ports don't.
That reminds me of the old days with component analog inputs. One of them would only be for 480p, and one would be for 1080i.
Exactly. Yeah. So that exists too, which means, hey, if you have more than one external source, you might need what he's suggesting, which is the HD Fury Integral 4K 60. HD Fury is a company that makes these little external boxes that sit in between the output of your player or the output of your AV receiver or something like that, and the input of your TV. They sit in the signal chain there, and they basically sniff out things like the EDID, that's the extended display information data, and they sniff out the copy protection and resolution and frame rate and stuff like that. And they basically make sure that the source and the display are able to talk to one another.
Now, is it taking out any copy protection?
It is not. What it's supposedly doing is just saying, hey, I am now the sync device. I am now the display. Go ahead and send it to me, and then it's rejiggering it and passing it on to the display. So, yes, would the HDMI group like for you to be doing this? Probably not. But at the same time, they created a situation where you legitimately bought a 4K TV a year ago, and now you can't plug an Ultra HD Blu-ray player into it. So, nuts to them, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. I'm sure there'll be much better ways to pirate things than this, so they probably don't care.
Well, that's just, I mean, who is actually taking the output of a Blu-ray player, like the HDMI output, putting that into a recorder and recording it in real time to pirate stuff?
No one.
That's not how anybody pirates anything. So
no.
Yes, it is a frustrating thing. So yeah, this HD Fury, they had other ones before when we were just dealing with 1080p, but they have this new one. It is a $200 device. So it's not inexpensive, but it's not insanely expensive. It also has 2 inputs and 2 outputs, so you can use it as a little bit of a matrix switch as well.
I see. Yeah.
You know, so it's got some good benefits there. So it's worth checking out. They say they guarantee that it'll work. So I don't know how much that guarantee is worth, but
well, means you can send it and get your money back, and no harm, no foul.
That's right. Yeah. So it's a good thing to check out if that's the situation, because $200 is definitely less expensive than buying a new TV, right?
That's true. And especially if you just bought a really good TV you're proud of, and then you find out it doesn't do something you needed to do, you don't want to buy a new TV.
Yeah, so thank you to Alungo. That's something I'm sure people will like to check out. And I also want to thank Ryan M. He alerted us that there's a company called Summit Hi-Fi. They are in Canada, and if you are a Canadian who has been trying to buy Emotiva gear, because we've mentioned Emotiva quite a bit on the podcast, it's not that difficult now. It certainly was like a year or 2 ago to get things shipped to Canada from Emotiva. Now, if you contact Emotiva directly, it's not too bad, but of course there are all the cross-border fees and the exchange rates to deal with, which are horrible right now. So Summit Hi-Fi are in Canada. They list all the prices in Canadian dollars, and they are an official Emotiva reseller for the Canadian market. So that's cool. They on their website, they don't have the entire product range from Emotiva listed, so I don't know if they have access to all the products, but I'm sure if you write to them, if there's a specific product they don't have listed on their website, they seem like the likely guys to go to be able to import that for you. So a little bit like how SVS had Sonic Boom audio before, and now you can buy directly from SVS in Canada if you want to, but they sort of set up these resale partners in other countries sometimes to make it easier. So
the only importation that's ever happened at our house is my wife is a librarian and a Harry Potter fan, so she had to have the Harry Potter British versions.
That's right. Where it's the Philosopher's Stone, not the Sorcerer's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone was like, I mean, you can't say real, but it's like a historic thing that exists outside of Harry Potter, whereas the Sorcerer's Stone is completely made up. So
there you go. So and there's also all kinds of fun vocabulary.
That's right.
It's different.
Yes.
So She wanted that.
You have both versions of the movies too, where they recorded some scenes twice to have the differences. Anyway, on to our actual questions. These are ones that were left over from last week. So Carl R, we're finally getting to you. We're peppering in some that he sent this week too, but we'll deal with all of Carl's questions at once. So Carl found an article on Boing Boing, the website, boingboing.net, and it references a Wired article from Wired.com, where they're talking about some $17, the company is called M. Rice, and it's the E300 earphones. These are little in-ear monitors, $17, and they have the phrase better than $1,000 in-ear monitors that's sort of tossed around in there, better than the J. Harvey Audio, which are like the super professional, get your ears molded, professional musicians are using them on stage. They're like, oh, they sound better than these. So, however, it looks like the Boing Boing article kind of skimmed the Wired article, because what they're saying from the Wired article isn't actually what they were saying about the E300 earphones. It seems to be what they were saying about the E100 earphones, and there are some crazy things about that. So, Lee, I don't know if you read through this whole article or...
I have not. Let me just say, it reminds me of the little graphic meme of the UFO, and it says, "I want to believe."
Sure.
Like, I really want to believe this is possible. It feels like someone ought to be able to do it. I don't know. Because, after all, earbuds, expensive ones, are still just tiny things with lots of metal and plastic in there.
Yeah.
It feels instinctively like it should be possible to get really good $17 earbuds. But I've never heard good $17 earbuds.
Well, going back to the E100s that the Wired article is actually talking about, basically they're just summarizing what one guy on a forum, and his forum post got picked up on Reddit and like exploded. It's like, okay, I don't know what value that is. It's one dude's opinion, but he was like, oh, first of all, you get these E100s and they're like $12. He's like, but you have to put them in sideways. Like, you don't actually put them in the way you'd normally put them in. You like put them in and turn them sideways, and then you hold them there either with some tape or by pinching your finger around your ear to hold them in, and then they sound amazing. I'm like, but
no,
what?
No.
Like, okay, fine, but what? That's just silly. And then they're like, oh, is there something you could wear normally where you don't have to hold it in with tape or hold both hands up to your ears, pinching them to hold them in? Is there something they make? And then they're like, oh, there's these E300s and they're only $17. Well, first of all, these M. Rice ones are already a knockoff, right? Because there's this other company. What was their name? It was Chintech.
Chintech.
Chintech has E300s, the same model number, and they're like $25. And then there's these M. Rice ones, also called E300s, and like the president of Chintech was like, oh yeah, those are a knockoff of ours, but there's not much we could do about it because we're both based in China and people just knock stuff off.
Right. And you know what? It might be the same materials inside.
Oh yeah, it could be the exact same production
because
line.
Last Christmas I got my wife a little Bluetooth audio device, just a little speaker, that it's got a battery in it, good old Bluetooth speaker. Bose makes one for like $200.
Sure.
And then like JBL makes one for $100, and this thing is $35. And it is exactly the same form factor as, like, all of them at all price levels are the same size, appear to have the same drivers, appear to have almost the same set of features and buttons on top. And so it makes me think it's possible, but it's not going to be $1,000 sound down to $17.
As they got onto these E300s, they're like, oh, they clearly have a V shape, what we call a smiley face curve, where the bass is tipped up and the treble is tipped up, but the mid range is kind of recessed. Yeah. And then they're like, and they have microphonics where if you tap the cable, you hear a thump 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 in your earphones, right? It doesn't damp that very much. And then they're like, but if you ignore all of that, they sound really good. I'm like,
but basically you're describing the Sennheisers I have in my ears right now. They're really boomy bass, sizzly highs. They're ridiculous.
But there's a gazillion things that sound like that. That doesn't make them sound special. And then they're like, if anyone criticizes them for not having linear response, don't listen to those trolls. These sound great. I'm like, trolls? I'm like, I am not a troll for saying that having a smiley face curve is not my optimal. If you like it, I'm fine with that. If you like tipped up bass and tipped up treble and recessed mid range, I'm fine with that. Some people use an EQ to make their linear headphones sound like that. That's totally fine. But if I want a headphone that's capable of producing accurate sound, I don't agree that makes me a troll.
No, it does not. No. And I guess the lesson here is read past the clickbait website.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. So, first of all, don't take all your information from one person on a forum.
Right.
Just because Reddit has 230 responses doesn't mean it's the truth.
No
And
kidding.
and read the article. And if you're going to be a website that summarizes someone else's article, please read the article. That would
Right.
also be helpful. Anyway, enough about that. Carl noticed there is the Onkyo HTS 5800. It is a home theater in a box. It comes with a separate AV receiver, one of Onkyo's actual AV receivers, and 5 speakers. However, the front speakers of this 5-speaker package include upward firing drivers on the top of them. So
Right.
this is actually a 5.1.2 Dolby Atmos enabled home theater in a box. It's $800 MSRP, and he's basically saying, he's like, this is the least expensive Atmos capable thing that he could find. And he's just wondering, do we think this is like a good thing, a bad thing? Like he's in his mind, the more people who buy Atmos capable systems, the more they'll be buying Atmos content, and the more Atmos content gets purchased, the more the studios will make more Atmos content. And he's
Sure.
a fan of Atmos, so it's like, but how good is this really? Is $800 cheap enough? You know, just what are our opinions there?
It's the same as it was when surround sound started to really catch on many years ago. These cheap, not very good surround sound systems, but it didn't hurt the overall business. So I think there's probably some truth to what he's saying, that if more people have Atmos enabled systems, whether they are good or not, then Atmos can go, looky here, or Dolby can go, look, everybody's got these. And then people go, okay, well, we'll put out an Atmos version of this movie. We'll mix it for Atmos. And then those who have good systems get to enjoy that. So that sounds entirely possible. I don't have a problem with people buying an Atmos system. It's just,
No.
you know, go ahead. It's just going to bounce a few little echoey sounds off the ceiling like
That's
that.
right.
But it's okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, the nice thing about the Onkyo systems is that at least it is a full-out regular AV receiver. So if
Right.
you want to replace the speakers, you totally can. Or if you want to keep the speakers and upgrade the AV receiver later, you can do that too. There's no proprietary connections or weirdness like that going on. So I appreciate that.
I assume on these little home theater in a box systems that are Atmos enabled, you're running 2 speaker wires to these speakers that have the up firing.
That's right. Yeah,
drivers,
you'll be using 2 sets of binding posts and 2 sets of speaker wire to run from the AV receiver to each front speaker.
Oh, people are going to get it so wrong.
Yeah, I hope. I mean, they have a quick setup guide, of course, with the diagram. I mean, honestly, the upward firing thing is a totally separate speaker. It has its own binding post. It has its own signal coming from the AV receiver. It just happens to be sharing the cabinet of the front speaker. But you're right. I wouldn't.
Well, I'm
Put
looking.
past a lot of people to.
I'm looking at the
hook up
back of said receiver, and it's using you can use like banana plugs or bare speaker wires for the front speakers, just your front, left, and right.
That's right.
And then everything else is bare wire.
It's spring clips. Yeah.
The height / back are spring clips.
Yeah.
So, well, that's just asking for confusion, because
I know.
you would have to have color coded plus the particular cross
Which they
section
do.
shapes or something.
It is color coded. Yeah. Yeah. It's very tricky because, I mean, I'm in agreement that if we want Atmos and just immersive audio and object based audio in general to take off, that it does need to come down in price. It can't just be $1,200 plus AV receivers, and it can't just be $1,000 per pair and up speakers, right? That's
yeah,
not,
that's true. Yeah.
You know, that's pricing out a huge number of people in the market. But at the same time, you don't want it to be something that either has no benefit or actually goes backwards because it just confuses people and then end up hooking it up wrong. So I'd almost like to see more, gosh, I mean, like an all-in-one, you know, basically a sound bar, which we're actually going to be talking about later, like Yamaha's digital sound projector, but at a lower price, because like I've been saying for a while now, I think the home theater box is almost giving way to sound bars. Like that is the entry level now, whereas home theater boxes used to be the entry level. Now sound bars are the entry level.
Sure.
So
you're really running up against people's aesthetics and their practical limitations in their house when you get to so many speakers, and you also run up against people's practical limitations and what they know how to properly hook up. I'm serious, no matter how easy you make it, people aren't really that smart. Just saying, I've met a lot of people. So, I don't know that, I don't see how I hope I'm wrong, but I don't see how Atmos is ever quite the appeal of just good old 5.1 surround sound.
Yeah, well, I think you're exactly right in that it is very much akin to when home theater in a boxes were sort of the new thing. And it's, the number of people who went surround sound at all is still small. And then the number who will go Atmos is even smaller. But I think what we're going to see, like, honestly, if you look at Denon and Marantz's lineups right now, you basically can't buy one of their AV receivers, their newest 2015 models, that doesn't have Atmos and DTSX.
Right. Oh, it's going to be on all receivers eventually.
Yeah, it's just a default thing. So once that just becomes the default for your home theater in a box as well, then it's like, well, it's just there, whether you really want it or not. That's not the reason you bought it. It's just it came along for the ride. So
right. I think more likely you'll find low-end receivers that say Atmos capable, and then on the back you'll be able to hook up additional amplifiers. It'll have the line level outs maybe. Because that would be not terribly expensive.
Yep, we could be getting it. But I mean, so many already have 7 amps, so I think the 5.1.2 will be common. So I don't, basically, Carl, I don't really think it hurts or helps, to be honest. I think it's one of these things that just sort of slides in the background. It'll be the de facto standard. We're not getting rid of 7 amplifier receivers, and object audio is definitely going to be here. So that's sort of where I feel there. So anyway, moving on, he has a notice that we've mentioned several times. We've talked about reference volume and how if you're using your own handheld SPL meter, that you want to make sure you have your volume set to 0 dB on the front of your AV receiver before you start the test tones, to make sure that you're getting the test tones at the correct volume, so that when you see them reading 75 dB on your SPL meter, that's actually correct. And that you're not starting with the tones too loud or too quiet. He has a Denon AVR X7200WA. That's their big flagship, everything in the kitchen sink thrown into it. But he noticed that his volume dial goes from 0 to 98. It does not go into negative numbers, and obviously 0 is mute in his case, not reference volume.
Right.
And he's like, well, in the manual it kind of mentions like 80 on that scale as being the equivalent of reference volume, but how come he can't see just 0 dB, or should he just use 80? Like, what's going on here?
If the manual says 80, use 80.
Well, I would suggest,
for instance, on my receiver reference volume, 0 dB, but it'll go even higher than reference volume. Right. Yeah. And so that would make sense that you'd have a little headroom above reference volume in case you just want to blow the doors off the joint.
Yeah, it'll go into plus, plus positive numbers. Yeah. So on the X7200WA, for sure, and on many AV receivers, there are actually 2 different volume scales. So this is something you can change in the settings. In the X7200WA's case, if you go into the settings and you go into the audio menu, there is a sub-menu under the audio section that says volume, and the first one in there is scale. And you can choose whether the scale says from 0 to 98 or from negative...
minus 79 and a half.
Yeah, that's right.
To 18.
To plus 18, right, exactly. Right. With 0 dB being reference volume on that relative scale, and that's what they call it. They call it the relative scale because it is all relative to reference volume. It is showing you how far below or above reference volume you are with those negative or positive numbers, versus what they call the absolute scale, which just starts at 0 and it's all positive and goes up to 98 because that's what some people prefer. And it does mention in there that 80 is equivalent to 0.
I just realized this is like deciding between Fahrenheit and Celsius.
A little bit. Yep. They show the same thing, but using different numbers. And there's no harm doing it either way, but not all AV receivers have this option. Some of them only give you the relative scale or only give you the absolute scale and don't allow you to choose between the two of them. And if all you have is the absolute scale, where it starts at 0 at mute and then all the numbers are positive, not all of them offer the same range, and not all of them will have 80 as being equivalent to reference volume. Right. It's an arbitrary number. So you have to be careful. Usually, here's a little hack or life hack for you. If you look at the network setup, because most AV receivers now have network setup, or their zone 2 output where you can fix the volume output and not have it variable on the AV receiver because you're going to use an amp on the other end with a volume dial. Right. Often in there, it will tell you where to set the volume for that fixed output to send it out to the network or to send it out to zone 2, and that will be equivalent to reference volume. So that's sometimes the place you have to look for the number if all you have is that absolute scale. But good question, because that's definitely going to affect a lot of people. But use the relative scale. It makes life easier. If you know what it means, then now you know, oh, I'm 15 decibels below reference volume, and now you know that. Whereas on
And
the
remember,
absolute
it's
scale,
logarithmic. Decibels are very interesting.
Yep. So he's saying he's using Odyssey because it has multi-Q XG32, and it sets the volume levels, the trim levels for each of his speakers and his subwoofers. But then he likes to go back in and manually play the test tones, look on his handheld SPL meter, and maybe adjust it a little bit. He's like, if Odyssey has done that, should he even do that? Should he make those tweaks?
Well, see, the word "should" is a loaded term. Do you like how it sounds after you do it? Then you should. I mean, you don't have to if you want it to be accurate. I would generally trust what Odyssey did. But if you go back and you just like a little few more decibels of this and a few more of that, go for it.
That's exactly it. Yeah. I mean, honestly, Odyssey is pretty darn accurate on this. If what you want is for everything to be playing back at reference volume, if you use dynamic EQ so that if you turn down your volume dial below reference volume, it will account for your human hearing not being linear, and it will keep everything audible. So those things that would fall below the threshold of human audibility, it will boost them back up so that you can still hear them at least using dynamic EQ. But lots of people just say, hey, look, when I listen at full reference volume, I would still like the center channel to be a little bit louder than all the other speakers. I would still like my surround speakers to be a little bit louder or a little bit quieter because I find them distracting or I don't notice them enough, whatever it is. You can absolutely adjust it to taste.
Sure you can.
The thing is, if all you're doing is relying on the SPL meter, that I wouldn't so much look at. I would actually be more interested in tuning it by ear than tuning it by the SPL meter, because the SPL meter, if it's showing you when you play the internal test tones that every speaker is slightly different from 75 dB, chances are that's because you're too close to the microphone of that SPL meter. Like you're holding it in your hand or you have it on a tripod, but you're standing right behind it. So that you can read the darn thing.
That's right. You have to be somewhere near it.
That's right.
Get binoculars out and look at it.
It's more often something like that because I mean, it's rare that after you've done Odyssey and then you look at your SPL meter playing the manual test tones, that it is off in any significant way from 75 dB.
And also the SPL meter's microphone, the way it's measuring that sound pressure, is not tuned to Odyssey. Odyssey knows what microphone that you have to hook up.
Odyssey is its full range, whereas the SPL meter at best is probably going to be C weighted, which means it's really only going from 80 to 8,000.
Sure.
So there's some things in there where if you're saying, hey, I ran Odyssey and then I pulled out my SPL meter and it told me that one speaker was 73 and another speaker was 75 and another speaker was 74, I wouldn't override Odyssey's settings with the SPL meter when you're within like a decibel or two, because that's probably more the inaccuracy of the SPL meter than it is Odyssey having made a mistake. So if that's what you're thinking of, that's where I sort of fall on that.
Although my own sort of OCD made me adjust some wipe-out settings because well, the reason is because I was pretty sure I had the microphone dead center, and yet still it added a couple of decibels or like a 1.5 decibels to like the right side. I'm like, why? It should be the same. So I just made it the same because it made me mad.
Well, you could have uneven reflections off of sidewalls, though.
I probably do, yeah.
And the sidewall reflections are coming in fast enough that they are essentially summed with the direct sound. So, I mean, those auto setup programs, they pretty much get it right. As far as the distances and the levels go, they pretty much get it right. So if what you're after is reference, I would trust them. Anyway, last one for Carl. He's considering a new screen. He has a projection set up. He's considering a new screen that he would actually mount on the wall this time, because right now he has a pull-down one. And he would possibly like to have that screen be able to change aspect ratios. He says, like what you see in an actual proper cinema, which is motorized masking, right? You can see the black frames either come in from the top or in from the sides to change the aspect ratio. Basically, just any thoughts or advice on that? I don't know, Lee, I'll let you go ahead if you have.
Well, I've heard you say before, Rob, you tend to prefer just buy a 16:9 screen and let it go at that. At least that's my impression of your opinion. And I, if that is your opinion, I agree. Because man, it's so expensive and gnarly to do the anamorphic lens trick on a projector, and I would almost want, if you want to motorize mask it, I'd almost want to motorize mask it from the top and bottom. Have a 16:9 screen, and when I show a 2.35 to 1, mask it from the top and bottom. Otherwise, you get into the whole anamorphic lens thing, and it gets very expensive and tricky.
Yeah. I mean, I know I'm a bit of an outlier here because there are lots of people who have their 2.35 to 1 CinemaScope wide screens.
Yeah.
They either use an anamorphic lens or they just live with the black bars being projected above and below their screen. And then when they show 16:9 content, now it is smaller than the CinemaScope screen. It's the same height, but it is not as wide. And I see the appeal of that.
I do too.
You know, my whole thing of, you know, I'm a fan of having two screens, unfortunately, which obviously ups the cost, but both of them being 16:9, one of them just being larger than the other. And that can be in the form of you have a flat panel on the wall and then a larger 16:9 that comes down in front of it, or actually having two 16:9 projection screens, one larger than the other. And my whole reasoning for that is simply, if you're watching an IMAX feature, you want it to fill the whole screen and you don't want it being projected above and below a CinemaScope screen.
Right.
If you're watching a feature like The Dark Knight that changes aspect ratios between CinemaScope and IMAX, I'm not a fan of having things projected above and below the CinemaScope screen. A lot of movies that have subtitles, if they're CinemaScope but they have subtitles, the subtitles are actually below the image and they're into the black bar at the bottom.
Right.
Which gets cut off if you have a CinemaScope screen. So for those reasons, I'm like, just stick with a 16:9, but make it huge. Have one that's huge so that your CinemaScope is the correct width, and then have a second, smaller 16:9 screen for your HD TV content, which should be smaller than your CinemaScope. But the other way, of course, is just to have one screen and then have motorized masking that you can make whatever aspect ratio you want.
Yeah, I can see the appeal when you're in the theater and the screen gets wider and you go, ooh, the movie's coming on.
That's right.
And it's bigger than the advertisements we just watched. It's so exciting. Right. And instead it'd be like, ooh, look, my screen's getting smaller so I can watch the movie. I can see why that would be weird. But if you, I got to put it this way, if you have the money for it and you don't mind the intricacies of it, then do the cool big wide screen.
Well, the issue is how much masking do you want? Because you can get four-way masking, which is, you know, masks will come in from both sides and the top and bottom. But four-way masking systems are expensive. Of course, you have Stuart Film Screen, and then one that has been very popular has been Screen Innovations, because they have acoustically transparent for everything with woven instead of micro-perforated, which is most of Stuart's offerings. But they're $20,000 plus. Oh. And then you now have Seymour with their Seymour Screen Excellence division, which they only sell via retailers. They don't sell Screen Excellence products online. But Seymour has come into this market. They have a new four-way masking system, but it undercuts the other guys, but it's like $16,000 to $17,000. It's still crazy expensive for four-way motorized masking. So if you get a CinemaScope screen, one that's 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio, and you're saying that's what I'm going to start with, and then all I want to be able to do is bring the sides of the screen in to turn it into 16:9. So I don't need four-way masking, I just need two-way masking now. I just need masks on the side. Karada has systems that are two-way masking. You can do either or. You can do ones that come in from the sides or ones that come in from the top and bottom. But those are much less expensive.
Sure.
If you just do the two-way masking instead of the four-way.
And you could also just buy little motorized curtains and hang black velvet curtains.
That's the other thing, your own curtains on the side. Of course, some people worry about there being a little bit of a shadow behind the curtain onto the screen, you know, if you're really persnickety like that. But Karada has that. It's called their Masquerade masking system. And it's like an order of magnitude cheaper, you know, it's like, you know, $1,700 instead of $17,000, right? Wow. So that starts getting into like, yeah, maybe you could actually afford that, right? If you're a normally healed person. So that's certainly one thing to consider. The other one is Seymour AV has manual masking. These are just magnets. These are panels with magnets that you physically walk up and slap them on there. And because the magnets are all aligned, it automatically aligns itself. So it's not as cool as being able to push a button on your remote control and having it motorize itself in. But if what you want is the effect, you can have four-way manual masking for a very affordable price.
And then you just put on a black ninja outfit and walk up there right as the movie's starting and just make whirring noises.
This is what kids are for. Hey, kids, go grab the masks, put them up there. So it's really tough for me. I mean, hey, basically, if you don't have to ask, then go ahead and get some four-way masking. Because if that's the type of budget that you have to work with, go for it. It's cool. It's awesome. But yeah, I'd I'd look into a less expensive option because they are very expensive. So Brian, moving on to our second listener here, he has noticed that Ascend Acoustics, a popular speaker company that I talk about a lot, they are running a Thanksgiving sale, and he's trying to decide what models to buy. Now, I have to double back since some time has passed since he emailed us. He's actually already made his decision. But for other people looking in, they have a Thanksgiving sale right now where they're selling their CBM 170 SEs, that's their regular bookshelf monitors, and their CMT 340 SEs, which are their huge, almost tower size, but they're still technically huge bookshelves. They're on sale. But he actually got an HTM 200 SE. Which is their smallest model. It's sealed. It's about 6 inches deep, and it's 2 4-inch drivers with a 1-inch tweeter. And he already had that, and he says, oh, that one's not really part of the Thanksgiving sale, but he already had it and got it at a discounted price. He called up Ascend and was like, can you work anything else out? And Ascend being a very cool company and being a small, non-publicly traded company, they're like, yeah, we can.
How about that? See, I always say, always be prepared to haggle.
Exactly.
Always make offers. I do it at Target.
Yeah, I mean, the worst thing they can do is tell you, no, we have to sell you at sticker price. Okay, didn't hurt to ask.
All the time. I'll walk up with a thing of blueberries and go, no, that should be $250. And they go, oh, okay. And they change it.
But he basically, when he was debating this, he's like, what am I getting if I go to one of the physically larger models, the more expensive models? Mm-hmm. The HTM 200 SE, which he's like, you don't talk about it enough. I'm like the only guy who talks about it on podcasts, and I recommend it all the time because I think it's a great speaker. He's like, but it's even better than you said it was, and I don't mind the looks at all, this plain black thing. He's like, it doesn't look bad, and it sounds amazing, so talk about it even more. That's his words, not mine. But I'm happy to talk about it because it is a very versatile speaker, and it is the only sealed speaker in Ascend's whole lineup. Oh. And having a sealed speaker that does not have a port on the back like all their other speakers do, it does make a difference, particularly for wall mounting it. Or if you actually want to use what the name says and put it into a bookcase or into a shelving unit. Right. Because if you're putting it inside some sort of, container that has a back on it, having the port on the back is not the greatest idea. Because sound is coming out of that port and it's going to resonate around inside of that bookcase or inside of that shelving unit or whatever. Or if you have it mounted right up against the back of the wall, you're going to have a very loud reflection coming off of that port onto that back wall. So I love the HTM 200s because they're the sealed 6-inch thick design, totally wall mountable, stick them inside of a cubby. They'll still sound great. I think they're a fantastic choice. He didn't really have any of those situations, but he still has a smaller room where he's sitting quite close to the speakers. So really what you're looking at when you're going to larger and larger speaker is they just get louder. They can just play louder.
I suppose they go lower in frequency if they have bigger drivers.
That's right. But
if you're crossing over at 80 hertz anyway.
Crossing over to subwoofers anyway, right?
Yeah.
So definitely, if the HTM 200s being the size that they are, they have their output limits, right? If you're sitting 15 feet away, these are not the speakers for you. They have their output limits. They're a small speaker that can only play so loud. That's when you would want the big CMT 340s. You're sitting 15 feet away from them. You want the output capabilities. But in a small room, small setting, close to walls, love those HTM 200s. So all of that there, he went on to cables. He's asking, what are our opinion of a company called bettercables.com? He needs a new subwoofer cable. He needs some new speaker wire. And frankly, he just wanted to try something different. It's not like he's unhappy with what he had before or anything. It's just like, hey,
he's just having fun with it.
Yeah. What do you think? Lee, are you familiar with them?
I'm not familiar with Better Cables. I mean, they look gorgeous. I mean, honestly, like you go to their main website, the first cables you see, these Silver Serpent audio cables, just as an example, man, they're pretty. And if they're going to be visible and you like it, great. But I bet it's not going to make any difference. That's my guess.
Yeah, I mean, Better Cables was one of the earlier online direct brands, and they came out when Monster was absolutely ruling the world. And rather than coming in and saying, hey, we can sell internet direct and undercut Monster, they're like, hey, we can make even better profits by selling direct and charging similar prices to Monster and using some of the same silly marketing gimmicks like it's silver coated copper, which makes absolutely no difference in audio frequencies.
No.
These special, like, whatever they were saying about their particular RCA plugs that they're using. Both of them famously, the RCA plugs didn't actually adhere to the proper standard, so they were too tight, which they said was a feature because they won't come off, but they can also, when you pull them back off, actually rip the plug right out of the back of your AV receiver. They're so tight.
That's not good.
So in case you can't tell, I'm not a huge fan I don't
Yeah.
think they're a great buy. There's absolutely no reason to believe any of their marketing claims. They will not make a difference in the sound.
No, no. I mean, they're just good looking. So, I mean, if
They're
it's
good
worth
looking.
60,
That's fine.
$70 to you, if for some reason you have things set up in your system where like there's a cool looking turntable and you're going to see the two RCA cables coming
Yeah.
away from it to the receiver,
Sure.
man, yeah, buy some cool looking cables. Why not? You know,
All
but
right.
don't buy them because you think it's going to sound better.
No, it's not that at all. Of course, you mentioned he's like, there's Monoprice, there's Amazon, there's Blue Jeans cable. I mean, Blue Jeans cable even these days, it's hard to say because they're more expensive. Now, that's because they are literally broadcast cables. It's the exact same stuff you'd find in a broadcast truck or in a broadcast studio.
Sure.
So they're not like crazy overpriced for what they are, but at the same time, you still don't need that in your house.
That's true.
But I actually really like Parts Express these days because Parts Express is like just as cheap as Monoprice now, and Monoprice is charging shipping and stuff like that now. So I really like Parts Express, but I mean, absolutely Monoprice, Amazon, still the place to go. So
Sure.
yeah, that's what about that. Lastly, he has a workshop / studio. He likes to do some woodworking in there.
Nice.
And he was thinking, oh, maybe he'll just get one of the little Emotiva Mini X A100 amps. That's their smallest little amp that they have, which has a volume dial on the front of it, so very handy for Zone 2. Maybe get another pair of the HTM 200 SEs that he's so happy with. He's like, but the CBM 170s are on sale, and they will be by themselves. There won't be a subwoofer in this woodworking room, so maybe he'll go for that. Any thoughts on that?
I don't see any problem with it. I'm looking at the little Emotiva right now because I didn't have time for research. And yeah, man, that's perfect. If it's going to be just to amplify one specific listening source,
Yeah.
you're going to go in there and jack in a little Bluetooth receiver or your phone or a CD player, anything. Sound looks perfect.
So my only thought on that, because I'm totally for that setup. I think that would be a great some CBM 170s with that Mini X A100 amp. That'd be a great Zone 2 in pretty much any room. But he mentioned doing woodworking, and to me, woodworking means you're sometimes sanding, and if you're sometimes sanding, that means you have dust.
And it's
right?
open.
And it's vented. The Mini X actually does have a little fan in it. The CBM 170s, of course, have their ports on the back. In a situation where you might have some dust, I'd be a fan of getting sealed gear.
Yeah.
To me, that just seems like maybe a prudent thing to do. So I just mentioned Parts Express. They have a little Class D amplifier, 100 watts per channel. It's by a company called Lee Pi. And it's this little Class D sealed 100 watts per channel, and not only does it have regular inputs and a volume dial on the front, because that's very important when it's Zone 2, it also has Bluetooth, so if you're just in that room and you want to play something via Bluetooth directly to that unit, it can do that very easily. And then in this case, the HTM 200 SEs that he already has and he's already happy with, it's like, yeah, they're not going to dig down to 20 hertz, we know that, but they're sealed. Right. So for a situation like this, I'm a little bit more of a fan of going that direction. So
no, I agree with you completely. And plus that little Lepi thing has the cutest little nubby Bluetooth antenna.
That's right.
There's value in that. There's value in that. That's adorable.
It's not Wi-Fi. It is only Bluetooth, but it does have the little nubby antenna. That is right.
Like a little hamster size antenna on the back. That's great.
So let's head on to Drew W. He wrote to us. He says he has a 4.1 system, so no center speaker.
Okay.
He's using Vandersteen speakers and a Vandersteen subwoofer. And honestly, I mean, I have not heard Vandersteen speakers. All I know is people who have Vandersteen are like Vandersteen, like evangelists. People who are Vandersteen fans are like really hype on their speakers.
Okay.
So I will take that at face value. If you're happy with them, I got zero qualms with that. So that seems to be the case. But anyway, he has those speakers in that sub hooked up to an Onkyo TX NR838, and his room is 16 feet by 17 feet, and it's a dedicated theater. It's a nice setup. He's got 2 rows of seating. The back couch is on a riser, and then he has his main seats on the floor in front of that.
I see. Okay, and the riser in the back is a little off-centered. Looks
a little
like.
bit, yeah, because there's the door on the rear left side, so you had to leave room for the door to swing open.
Gotcha.
Right now he's noticed he's sitting in his primary seat, of course, right in the middle of the room, basically. Yeah. And he's noticing he's got almost no deep bass at the main seat. But if he moves to some of his other seats, he does have nice deep bass.
Aha!
He only has the one subwoofer. So
you've come to the right podcast.
You absolutely have, Drew. Yeah. Heck, Lee, you've heard us say this enough times. Why don't you tell him what we should do here?
buy another Vandersteen subwoofer is what you need to do. Yeah, you're getting nulls right there in the middle.
That's right.
Your room size happens to be exactly at whatever you're determining to be deep bass. Maybe it's 60 hertz or something.
Sure. Yeah.
That's a lot of people when it gets down to about 60 or below, you're calling that deep bass. It's your room size happens to be reinforcing and nulling out certain frequencies. And unfortunately, your centered chair is right in a null where two waveforms are coming together to cancel each other out.
Yep.
And if you can't change the size and shape of the room or move the chair, then you need to go get another subwoofer or move the subwoofer you have.
Or move the subwoofer, and that's exactly it. If you're in a situation, let's just assume right now that this is someone who has one sub, they're not going to move their seat, and they want to find a solution for that primary seat.
Right.
So then we do a thing we call the subwoofer crawl.
Absolutely. Put the subwoofer in your seat, right?
Put the subwoofer in your seat.
Then go crawl around, put your head everywhere you could put the sub. And wherever you hear even bass, that's where you should put the sub, the one sub.
And it's very important. Lots of places describe the subwoofer crawl. If you just Google search that, you'll find lots of articles on how to do it. So many of them say put on some bass-heavy music or a bass-heavy movie and listen to that. No. Play bass sweeps.
Bass sweeps.
You want to hear all the bass frequencies, and you want them all to be equal volume, not just the few notes that happen to be in that song, and maybe they're at different volumes from one another. That is not what you're looking for. You're also not looking for the spot that just produces the strongest bass.
That's true.
You're looking for the spot where you can play a bass sweep from your subwoofer. Your subwoofer is currently in your seat, and you are listening for where the bass sweep sounds even.
Even all the way across, absolutely.
The whole sweep sounds the same volume throughout. You might not be able to find any spot that actually does that, but you want to find the one that comes closest, because then you can equalize to even out any small little humps or bumps that are still remaining. But here's the thing. If you got one sub, that is only going to work for one seat. You can maybe find a spot in your room, because right now he has it in his front right corner.
It may be all right on the couch behind you.
Exactly. Yeah. Like right now he's saying it sounds bad in his primary seat, but good in some other seats. Well, that's going to flip. Now it'll sound better in your primary seat, but those other spots where it used to sound good, maybe now it sounds bad there.
Yeah, but it's your theater.
That's right. Yeah.
So if they don't like it, they can bring another sub.
So that's where Lee's advice of you need a second subwoofer to even this out.
If you want it perfect in all seats, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very important that what we're doing here is we have to understand what sound waves do in a room. Waves of all types pass through each other. It's not that two waves meet each other and if they cancel out, that's the end of both waves. No. Waves just travel on their merry way. But where they intersect, they can interact. And it's kind of an amazing thing because you have one wave coming along and it happens to be forming a peak at this certain spot in the room. And another wave coming along that happens to be forming a trough at that same spot in the room. And right there at that one spot where they intersect, they cancel each other out. Now you hear nothing. That creates a null. But to the left and the right of that spot, those waves continue on their merry way. They pass right through one another. It's only at the intersection. So that's why you can have this one sub, one seat situation where sub seats sound good and others sound bad. One seat sounds super loud and the other one sounds silent. That it can totally happen. When you get two subwoofers, what you need to do is put them on opposite sides of the room from one another. Because what they do at that point is when the wave from the first sub traverses the room and reaches the second subwoofer on the opposite side of the room, if they're both playing in phase with one another, if they're both playing in mono, the timing always works out perfectly. That the second sub on the other side of the room is perfectly catching that wave just as it arrives. It's canceling it out at the wall just as it arrives. You do not get the sound wave bouncing off of the wall and doubling back on itself, which is what creates all these peaks and dips at different spots in your room. So it's very important that the two subs are across the room from one another. It doesn't work if you put them both on the same side of the room and just say, I have two subs, that should fix it. Nope. It's still an unevenly loaded room if you do it that way.
If the two subs were on the same side of the room, like let's say if you came to my house and where my couch is, I could put a sub sort of to each side of the couch.
Sure.
Okay, so that there would be a sub off to your right and off to your left, but they'd be right near the back wall. Would there be would that guarantee or no nulls while you're on the couch, but maybe you'd get a null in front of the speakers, closer to the TV, or how would that work? Are you guaranteed to sound good between the two subs, even if you put them both on the back wall?
No,
Or,
not necessarily,
no,
because
right.
the sound waves are longer than basically any dimension of your room, unless you have an absolutely massive room.
Right.
Down at 20 hertz, the sound waves are 55 feet long. So unless your room is 55 feet and longer in every dimension, including the ceiling, you're going to be hearing reflected sound. It's unavoidable. The sound
Right.
wave went across the room and bounced back before you ever heard one complete cycle of the wave. So it does not guarantee it just by sitting in between them. You're still having an unevenly loaded room.
Interesting. But if I had one to my right behind me and one to my left in front of me
That's right.
on the front wall,
That works.
then I'd be okay.
That's right.
Interesting.
Yeah, because you want them catching the waves where they are,
Yeah.
but then sending the waves out into the room evenly, and then you get this nice even dispersion of waves, and waves pass through each other, so you get you don't get the same peaks and nulls because they're not perfectly doubling back on themselves.
Right.
Back to their original source. So that's how that works. So like Lee said, get a second sub. Now I'm noticing in his room right now he has the first sub in the front right corner, but he doesn't have a spot in his rear left corner because that's where the door is.
I see.
However, he has a spot in his front left corner and a spot in his rear right corner.
Sure.
It looks like there's a chair with a blanket on top of it right now in the picture, but that is a very movable looking chair. It's just a standard chair that looks like it. So that's what I would recommend to you, Drew, is have one sub in your front left corner and one in your rear right corner.
But if he goes to the rear right corner, that sub's going to be up on that riser. Yes.
Yes, which
Is that going to make it? It might vibrate weird.
We're mostly worried about the waves traversing across the room, more or less two-dimensionally. We're not so worried about the verticality. I mean, you can, if you really want to get nuts about it, you can worry about the vertical standing waves as well. But it's far less likely that you're going to hear vertical standing waves than ones that are going side to side or front to back or diagonally across. So front left, rear right, that looks doable in his room. And he's saying, okay, he has this Vandersteen 2W. It's an interesting sub. It's like a $1,600 sub MSRP. It is 3 8-inch drivers, all three of them being powered by a 300-watt amplifier in a pretty small box, but it's a ported box.
That is an unusual design.
It's an unusual design.
Yeah.
Having a port in a box that size necessarily means that the port can only be so long. And the shorter the port, the higher the resonant frequency. So he's saying when he plays it really low, going down to 30, 20 hertz, like something like that, he's hearing some pretty bad distortion. Now, he recently moved and he's like, maybe it just got damaged in the move. I'm like, maybe it just distorts really low. It wouldn't shock me if it does.
I mean, may just be that you finally noticed it.
Yeah, because he's saying, he took the advice. He's played some bass sweeps. He's listening to that and he's like, yeah, this thing distorts when it gets really down low. Basically, if he's going to be spending upwards of $1,600 just to get a second one, I got to tell you, in the room size that you're in, for less than $1,600.
Man, yeah, I'd be swapping that out for 2 SVSs.
You can get
little
a pair.
sealed 1000s. What are they?
The sealed 2000s. The
SB
2000s. A pair of SB 2000s is under $1,500, I think, right?
Right.
Maybe you can look up the prices real quick on that. I'm thinking he probably likes the size, right? I'm thinking maybe he doesn't want a refrigerator-sized one or a giant tall cylinder. Although the tall cylinders would perfectly fit into those corners and they're black, they'd blend into the background. You barely even notice them. So you could get a pair of PC 2000s. Those would totally rock this room. But the sealed box, the SB 2000s, are about the same size as his Vandersteen. They would absolutely be adequate for this room size. And the pair of them would cost less than getting just one more Vandersteen 2W, which, like I say, is an oddly designed subwoofer.
Yeah, a pair goes for $1,300 on Amazon.
There you go.
Man,
so I gotta tell you, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, that's true. If you want if you want every seat to have even bass across all bass frequencies, you kind of want 2 subwoofers. And if you want 2 subwoofers, don't spend another $1,600. But then again, like you said, what if this guy's just hating us right now because we're saying don't get Vandersteen?
Well, he was open to the
subwoofers.
He was open to the subwoofers being a different brand. So
okay,
I have to give the advice I would say. And of course, SVS is not the only choice here. HSU has some great options.
Sure.
I mean, you could get a pair of their ULS 15s sealed subwoofers. They are a little bit bigger in dimensions, but they're still not gigantically bigger. Those could totally work. Rhythmic has their F12s or their F15s sealed subs. All of these are great options. The SVSs, I think, are actually the least expensive in the SB2000s, that is, out of those. So, those get the mention there. But yeah, lots of options here. And I wouldn't personally put that Vandersteen 2W at the top of the list at all.
Right.
So, yeah, that's the advice there. So, let's head off to Josh S. He is a new listener, recently started listening to AV Rant, and it's got him itching. He's got the upgrade bug. It's just hit him. He's
yeah.
You guys talk about gear. He's primarily looking at upgrading his receiver or his speakers. He's not sure which, maybe both, who knows, but he's got about $1,000, maybe $1,500 at the most to possibly spend. And he's leaning towards getting a new receiver because his current receiver, which is a Yamaha RX-V757, is old enough it does not have HDMI.
Okay, I know that feeling. That's what I did last year. Yeah, that's exactly what I had. A Yamaha that was an older one that all it had was optical digital. And so I couldn't do, 7.1 or anything. It had no HDMI. I had the same situation. All of a sudden I got a Chromecast for Christmas. Yep. And I went, I would like to be able to use this one day. And so I thought, well, I had a lightning strike. I had an excuse to buy some stuff, had some insurance money.
Yeah.
So I did exactly that. I upgraded. And then I became unhappy for my own strange reasons because I don't have a subwoofer. But that's a whole other story. And I still miss my special bass extension button.
Yes. Yeah. Well, he's saying,
I wonder if his old one has the same bass extension button, because mine is the RXV 995 from like the year 2000. I wonder if he could like understand my enjoyment of the bass extension button.
If anyone could, yeah.
Maybe Josh S could understand.
Well, he's heard us saying that, if you upgrade something, speakers are going to make the largest audible difference.
Oh yeah.
But he has Klipsch reference series speakers. So he's like, should he upgrade his receiver? Should he upgrade his speakers? Here's the thing. Those Klipsch speakers, you can definitely get speakers that sound different from them. That is easy because Klipsch have a pretty characteristic sound to them. But they are in no way even remotely close to what I would call bad speakers. They are good speakers that you already have, the Klipsch reference series. If you like the way those speakers sound, I got zero problem with keeping those. You can certainly get different sounding. So if that's really what you want, is something that sounds different, absolutely doable. But here's a case where right now he doesn't have lossless audio. He doesn't have Dolby True HD. He doesn't have DTS HD Master Audio because he doesn't have any HDMI inputs.
Doesn't have any of that.
Current receivers. He certainly doesn't have Atmos or DTS-X. That's obvious. Right. Will upgrading your AV receiver make a huge difference in the sound? I can't promise you that. But unlike someone who's going from an existing lossless audio HDMI capable receiver and maybe just getting a new one where they're not likely to hear any difference at all, you're likely in this situation to be able to hear something, right? It won't be as different as changing your speakers. It's not going to be that type of difference, but it's certainly going to be a potentially worthwhile one. So he was already kind of leaning towards the Denon AVR X3200, which is a great choice as far as I'm concerned. If you're buying them brand new, I would maybe lean you towards the sister model from Marantz, which is the SR5010, for the sole reason that at full retail price, the SR5010 for some reason is $100 cheaper.
There you go.
And they're extremely equivalent in feature set. There's two slight differences. The SR5010 has 7.1 analog inputs, which the X3200 does not. I have no idea who's still using those, but it has them. The X3200 has an independent second HDMI output. The SR5010 does not. So that actually could be a significant feature if you're running two separate rooms and you want separate sources in separate rooms with HDMI. But over at Accessories for Less, for some reason, the X3200 is $50 cheaper than the SR5010. I have no idea why.
The internet is crazy.
Sometimes. So yeah, that would be a great choice as far as I'm concerned, the X3200. What I really like is the X3200 does have pre-outs. So if you ever want to add external amplifiers, you can. And it's the least expensive model in Denon's lineup that does that.
Nice.
So yeah, I think that's a great choice. I think you will hear a benefit, certainly from going to HDMI audio and being able to finally hear lossless audio. Also, the X3200 is Atmos capable and DTS-X capable. It maxes out at 5.1.2, maxes out at 7 speakers. But if you're thinking he has $1,500 to spend, now if he gets the refurbished one from Accessories for Less, which I am totally for,
Sure.
there is no reason to avoid the refurbished models at Accessories for Less. They're coming directly from the manufacturers, and they're still backed by a manufacturer's warranty. So it's only $650, the X3200. So with his $1,000 to $1,500 budget, he's got some room left over. That can buy you another pair of speakers to become your top fronts or top middles in an Atmos setup, or front heights for that matter, if you want to mount them on the wall.
Right.
Klipsch has recently introduced upward firing Atmos-enabled modules, part of the reference series. So if you want to do it that way, you don't want to install them in your ceiling or hang them from your ceiling or hang them high up on the wall. They have upward firing ones that are $500 a pair, or you could just get a pair of matching bookshelf speakers, or you could get some in walls or in ceilings.
It depends on how itchy his itch is to buy things. I'm liking this idea though. New receiver and speakers, and now you've just jumped to a whole new feature, a whole new type of surround sound. That's good bang for the buck if that's what you can spend. I like, I agree with you, because his current speakers are quite good. So
exactly,
why not add a whole new realm above you?
Yeah. So unless what you really want is to change the sound of your system, you're unhappy with your Klipsch speakers and you want to change them, which he didn't indicate. But if that's the case, absolutely changing the speakers will make a bigger difference, even in this case, than changing the AV receiver. But if you're okay with the speakers you have and there's no reason you shouldn't be, then in your case, you're getting a very worthwhile upgrade with a new receiver. And it's a good time. It's finally a good time to buy an AV receiver.
Of course, don't forget, he also said, or should he save the money towards eventual finishing of the basement into a proper theater? And a proper theater, properly treated and sized and shaped the way you want, it has a huge effect.
Yes.
So it depends on how far away that would be.
That's right. But there's no reason you couldn't take your $650 X3200 and move it into the theater.
You sure could.
So I'm voting AV receiver for you, man. That's where I'm voting.
Yeah, I kind of am too.
All right.
Do it now.
So Barney was watching House of Cards on one of his friends' new Ultra HD TVs. 4K TV, House of Cards is one of the things you can watch in 4K as far as I know, off of Netflix. Barney noticed something. These are his words. This is how he describes the look of what he was seeing.
Okay.
Slower floating motion computer generated artificial look.
It sounds like a bad translation on Google Translate from Chinese or something. It has slower floating motion computer generated artificial look.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
right.
not 100% sure what he's describing, because he says he went into the settings, he turned off all of the I don't know what brand of UHD TV this was, but the motion flow or the auto motion plus or true motion or whatever the heck they called their frame interpolation thing. Right? He says he went in and turned them off, and it didn't change it. It's still there. This look that he's describing. Now,
could it also be some noise reduction processing happening that he might not have turned off? Because that wouldn't be motion processing, like the MPEG noise reduction I've seen on some TVs. Because that can soften things up and do weird stuff.
It's tough from this description to know exactly what's going on, because it's possible when he's talking about like slower floating motion.
That makes me think of the whole soap opera effect. But if he turned off the motion processing where it's not trying to generate new frames in between frames.
Well, I wonder if he is talking about soap opera effect, because in my eye, when I see soap opera effect, it looks like everybody's sped up a little bit.
Sped up, huh?
I mean, to my eye, that's what it looks like. It looks like everybody got put on like 1.25 times speed a little bit. They actually look like they're moving a little bit faster. And he's saying it's slower and floating. I'm wondering if he's just seeing an inherent blur.
Maybe an inherent blur, or is he seeing 24 frames per second in a strange way?
Yeah, that's just it. I mean, if it's a judder. Now, he's not saying it's stilted and jerky, which is what I would expect if it's judder. So slower and floating. Okay, so floating definitely makes me think interpolation. But slower makes me think blur. You know what I mean?
The words floating and slower make me think blur, but the words computer generated artificial make me think choppy.
Yeah.
And edgy, and
The issue here is there have been some TVs. This is well documented over on CNET, where for one reason or another, the anti-judder, anti-blur settings were not implemented properly, where there was no way to shut it off 100%. This was the case with some of last year's Vizios, I know. Supposedly they issued a firmware update, but some people say it's still that case where it never 100% shuts off. I know a couple of LGs had this problem where no matter what you did, there was no way to completely turn off the de-judder processing.
Sure. Now,
that could be the case.
We might be overthinking it. He didn't say what his source was for House of Cards. If he's streaming that,
I mean, it's definitely off of Netflix, but it's it's either the internal app or an external source.
But you see what I'm saying? If it's streaming, especially, you could get something when you get a bit rates going up and down. You might get slower floating motion, computer generated artificial.
I mean, usually if it's a bit rate problem on the stream, it just gets fuzzy. The motion doesn't change, right? It just goes lower in resolution typically, or it starts getting blocky.
But it gets kind of schmooey. It does get a little schmooey. The motion gets schmooey because it's not as good at showing motion when the bit rate drops.
I wonder, because if he was trying to get the 4K feed, which needs about 15 megabits per second, which a lot of things can't deliver smoothly.
So maybe it's not the TV. Maybe it's the source, and they
is also possible.
Try different things.
Yeah, try a Blu-ray. That's a very good idea. Try a Blu-ray and see if you still see it. If you still see it, then it's not the source,
right?
Because a Blu-ray is going to be pristine in that. Yeah, that's a good thought, Lee. So yes, Barney, since we don't know the exact model of TV, I can't tell you if it's one of the ones that's affected, but there is the possibility that it is, even when you turn off all the judder processing and that there were a handful of TVs I know that it never turned off no matter what you did. So
okay,
could be that. He also wanted to ask about, we mentioned before, this Yamaha YSP 5600, which is a digital sound projector. I think it goes for, what is it, about $1,600?
$1,600. Yes.
So it's
available December, it says.
That's right. It's
brand new, I guess.
Not a cheapy thing, but it has the claim to fame of being a soundbar shaped device. It's all one unit. It has 4 HDMI connections on it, so it essentially acts as your AV receiver.
And let me tell you, it's just bristling with drivers in all directions you can imagine.
Because it's attempting to mimic 9 speakers.
Yeah.
2 of which are upward firing. So it's attempting to mimic a 7.1 surround sound. The 0.1, there is a separate subwoofer for this thing. But it's attempting to mimic regular 7-speaker surround plus 2 upward firing drivers to create Atmos. And it is compatible with Atmos and DTS-X. So for the $1,600, you have to realize it's the equivalent of buying an AV receiver, a 9-channel AV receiver, and 9 speakers. If you think of it in those terms, $1,600 isn't crazy expensive, right?
Right.
Because that's what it's replacing. So he's looking at the manual for this thing, and it is very particular about where you are supposed to place it, how your room is supposed to be shaped, where your seat is supposed to be within that room.
Because it's doing magic. It's doing magic, and it has to do it in a very specific setting.
Well, it is genuinely reflecting sound off of the walls and ceiling. When we talk about not in 100% buying how effective the upward firing Dolby Atmos speakers are that are supposedly reflecting sound off of the ceiling, Yamaha's digital sound projectors are the real deal. They have these small little drivers. They have very sophisticated processing where one will fire and then the one right next to it will fire a few milliseconds after it, and then the one next to it and the one next to it, and all of those waves gather up and they can steer the sound around like a beam, and it is very beamy. Yeah. So you can actually bounce sound off of walls and ceilings and things like that. They are doing it for real. It is not fake. I have heard it. It is effective. But to be effective, it has to bounce stuff off of the walls and the ceiling and stuff. So if your right wall is a lot closer to this thing than the left wall, that's going to affect the sound. Mm-hmm. If you have your seat pushed up against the back wall, you can't create a proper reflection back there. If you are sitting too close to the thing or way too far away from it, it can't steer. It doesn't have the ability to steer that, that much.
So
it has a range.
Do they not have soundbar YPOW?
Well, they have their regular sound bars that just play with phase to try and give you some sort of pseudo surround effects, but they're not nearly as discreet and effective as their digital sound projectors are.
See what I'm saying? Like, does it not have a sound processing YPOW where you put a microphone and measure what's coming out of your sound bar?
Yeah, it comes with a microphone. It is a single measurement position. It really only works for one spot.
Right.
So, there are definitely limitations to this. Now, he's saying, look, someone who's buying a sound bar or a sound bar shaped thing is
Mhm.
probably buying it because they don't have a dedicated theater. And with
Right.
all the restrictions they're putting on where your seat needs to be placed, the shape of the room, how far away you need to be, you basically have to have a dedicated theater for this thing. Otherwise,
Almost, yes. Or at
you
least
know,
just a very common living room that's a rectangle.
but with your seat like away from the back wall, where a
Right.
lot of people, if it's their living room, they have their seat pushed up against a wall, right?
Most people do.
Yeah. So it is an interesting thing because he's like, who should buy this? Should anyone buy this? I'm like, you're right in that there's going to be a bunch of people who buy it and use it in a less than optimal setup and therefore are not going to hear the proper effect.
Right.
And they're going to wonder what the big deal is. And if you have the perfect setup for this thing to work, you can get even better sound by just getting a 9-channel AV receiver and 9 speakers. It will sound even better than this thing. So it's this weird nether region, right?
At that price, so if you happen to have your room arranged sort of like their diagram, if you happen to have, if it's drywall and you're this far away and you have carpeting, and if you fit all the specs for it and you don't feel like running speaker wires, if you just know I'm never running speaker wires, then maybe this is for you. I'm just not sold whatsoever on, sound bars are just, for me, sound bars are for people that just cannot stand what they consider to be big, ugly speakers or running speaker wires, but they want it to sound better than the TV speakers.
Yes.
That's what sound bars are for.
Now, this can do another thing, which is just focus all of the sound to one point, which if you're in a bedroom is very handy because it actually is effective enough where the person beside you in the bed barely hears anything and you get all the sound focused at you. It has really that mode. So that's an extra thing it can do. But honestly, I think where this makes the most sense are for custom integrators, custom installers. I think they're the best market for this because they're going to be setting up a room for a client and the client is saying, I don't want to see any speakers. And they go, well, guess what I can do?
Yeah.
I can put in one speaker that sits under your TV or above your TV and it does all the work and everything's there.
Right.
I think that makes sense. That
would be
or
perfect
the enthusiast.
Perfect in a bedroom, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Assuming you had enough space behind the headboard to the wall behind you.
Yeah.
If you had like a table back there, your bed wasn't quite all the way up to the wall. I bet you could have a really neat experience like that.
Yeah. But I mean, I am a little concerned about someone who might just walk into a Best Buy, buy this thing, and then be disappointed because they didn't read the instructions to begin with, right? Which a lot of people don't. So you're right. There are definitely caveats. That is not new. All the digital sound projectors have been that way. They've required this, essentially having a great room to begin with where you could get even better sound with separate speakers. So it is in this sort of nether region. He also wondered, he didn't notice the Dolby Surround up mixer mentioned. He's like, does this thing only have Dolby Atmos? And then if you want to upmix existing 2-channel or 5-channel content, they have their Cinema DSP 3D thing from Yamaha themselves that does add the upward effect. I found a mention of Dolby Surround Up Mixer in the glossary. I found definitely a mention of DTS Neural X whenever the heck that update arrives. I didn't see the sound mode and, toggling through the listening modes. I didn't see Dolby Surround Up Mixer. So honestly, I'm not 100% sure.
I would guess it probably has that because...
Yeah, just because Dolby made a big deal about anything that can decode Dolby Atmos will have a Dolby Surround Up Mixer in it. So I think it's buried in there. They just didn't make it explicit in the manual.
And in most manufacturers, and I know for a fact with my Yamaha, it definitely, you can turn off processing and just do the straight mode.
Yep.
Or you can turn it on and I can upmix to 5.1, 7.1.
Yeah.
In the receiver.
Regardless, though, when you're only adding 2 overhead channels, I wouldn't have a problem if that Cinema DSP 3D is the only upmixer that adds the height channels, and for some reason it doesn't have Dolby Surround, even though they have made it very clear that it will have DTS Neural X when that arrives. If that's the case, I still don't have a huge problem with it, because Yamaha's presence channels that they've been doing for ages now, it sounds fine as far as adding the overhead effect goes.
Sure.
So even if that is all that's there, I don't see that as a big downside. Alrighty, so let's move on to Mitch R. He wants to add a projector to his living room. He's considering the new JVC DLA X550. That's their new model that is compatible with high dynamic range. He was considering a 115-inch screen. He's looking at the Screen Innovations Zero Edge, which, as the name implies, basically has no border around it, no frame. And his room is 11 feet 9 inches wide by 19 feet 5 inches long, and he sits about 12 feet away from the screen. So he's got some pictures of his current setup where he has a flat panel mounted on the wall. And he's saying if he leaves all his speakers exactly where they are, and he just mounts the screen, the new projection screen, above his center speaker, it will leave like a very small amount, 6 inches, he's saying at most, from the top of the screen to the ceiling. And he's saying he's okay with that, which, as long as you're okay with looking upward a bit, if you have reclining seats, we have to remember that your resting eye level is gazing upward a bit, right?
True.
Once you're reclined. So that's not necessarily the end of the world, and he's not really worrying about that. He heard our discussion about how high the projector needs to be above the top of the screen, and he's like, I only have 6 inches up there. Am I going to be able to like ceiling mount my projector and actually have it low enough to clear below his ceiling fan, which he has in this room, and still have the screen even though the screen is up higher?
I wasn't seeing the problem till you said ceiling fan.
Yeah. That's what he's wondering about. So with the projector that he's looking at, the X550, if you go to Projector Central and you look at their throw distance calculator, if he wants a 115-inch screen, it can be anywhere from a little bit less than 12 feet away. This is the lens of the screen to lens of the projector to the screen. About 11 feet, 10 inches or so is as close as it can be for that screen size, all the way back to like 23 and a half feet or something like that. It can be quite far back in the room.
Right.
So he's looking at all of these and he's like, hey, am I going to be able to make this thing fit? So good news is it can only be about 15 inches above the very top edge of the screen. It has that 80% image lens shift that we talked about last week, which means it can be about 15 inches above the screen. But he's talking about having it like below.
He wants to know if he can get it down low enough to clear the ceiling fan, essentially.
And you absolutely can.
Oh, of course you could.
You could have this below the bottom edge of the screen, and that would be fine. You could have it on you could have it on a tripod behind your couch.
A tripod behind your couch, a shelving unit behind your seats. Sure. Yeah.
That is all absolutely
on the back
possible.
Wall, apparently with the throw distance, you could have this projector on a shelf on the back wall.
That's right.
You could still cover the screen. You're gonna, when you stand up, people are gonna yell down in front. That would work.
Yeah, you can absolutely fill the borders of the screen that he's suggesting.
Sure.
Being within the borders of the screen is never a problem. Any projector, unless it has, there are some that have like a fixed lens that only angles down or only angles up. Those do exist, but this is not the case here. It has a large lens shift range. It can absolutely be anywhere within the borders of the screen or up to 15 inches above or below the borders of the screen.
I mean, given its throw distance, I would say mount a shelf on the back wall exactly where you need it. Make it perfect. That would be the best solution, I think.
Yeah, he could totally do that. So last question he had is, he also wanted to know, like, if he does mount it to the ceiling, he isn't exactly sure of the stud layout in his ceiling.
Oh,
so he's like, how do I make sure I mount this thing?
Get a good stud finder.
Stud finder. And drill some little pilot holes. I mean, yes, you might have to putty over them. And
you could get I've done that before. Get a tiny little drill bit if you're not certain of the results on your stud finder, and just make sure it's long enough so that it would go through a layer of drywall, and you'll feel it. If you hit wood, you'll know it, and if you don't, it'll
pop right through with no resistance. That's
right.
So drill some little, use a stud finder, then drill some little pilot holes. If you want to mount your projector in a spot that doesn't perfectly line up with studs, because you absolutely do want the mount to go into studs.
Yes.
First of all, it's really not a big deal if this projector is off center because it has horizontal lens shift too. So frankly, I wouldn't even worry about it. But if you have a spot in mind, all you have to do is you put up any sort of piece of plywood, something sturdy, MDF, whatever it is, but usually just a piece of plywood.
And attach that to the studs.
Attach that to the studs.
Paint it to match the ceiling.
That's right. And then you put your mount into that. So that's easy. Lastly, he was saying, would we recommend a 0.8 gain or a 1.2 gain screen surface?
This is not my field. Rob, what do you recommend there?
There is no reason to go with a lower than 1 gain screen in his situation. I'd go for the 1.2. Like I say, that X550 is HDR compatible, although it has like a 1700 lumen output, which means realistically it probably has like 800, 850 once you've calibrated it, which is not tremendously bright. So if you actually want to be able to see some HDR, having a little bit of positive gain from your screen will only help you there. So definitely go for the 1.2 because you got really deep black levels coming out of that JVC. So you don't need to go below 1 to try and deepen your black levels at all.
There you go.
Yeah. So
get a nice bright screen. Enjoy. You know, his room is almost the same size as mine, except he's turned 90 degrees.
That's right.
I'm in the other direction where my face is like, 9 feet from my screen.
You could use a projector, Lee. There's a solution.
No, that wouldn't do it. No. What I want like a 60 to 65 inch screen to replace the 50, the 10-year-old 50 inch.
Still a nice upgrade.
Yeah.
So Infinite Gary, what would a show be without Infinite Gary? He has tried comparing 2 different center speakers in his theater. So room stayed the same, tried 2 different speakers.
Okay.
He's got his Dynaudio Confidence Center and he's got his Revel C52 center. So he tried them both and he noticed the largest difference that he could easily hear was in the lower registers of voices. So in the bassy baritone voice type thing, he heard a big difference, with the Dynaudio sounding more pronounced and bassy. And so he was just wondering, because he's looking at the specs of them, he's like, why? Why is that the case? And he goes, okay, well, the Dynaudio has specs going from 45 hertz to 22 kilohertz, and the Revel has specs going from 65 hertz to 18 kilohertz. He's like, is it just because there's this 20 hertz more extension spec'd on the Dynaudio? Is that the reason? Or
no, because pronounced bassy lower registers of voices don't go down to those levels, really. Not down to 45. So I wouldn't suspect that. It's just the natural response curve of the speakers, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things going on. Because first of all, I don't know. It doesn't sound like he changed his subwoofer settings, his crossover settings, his EQ settings.
Yeah.
Like, he's got this Anthem that has Anthem room correction, right? There's a lot of other variables potentially at play.
So you'd have to calibrate both separately and then check and see.
Yeah. Because this is all happening in that crossover region, right? Like the bassy part of the voice could be as low as maybe 120 hertz, right?
Yeah.
So that is still part of the crossover region between the subwoofers and the speakers. So you have this crossover region where you have 2 separate sources of sound. They have to merge properly together. And if you're just swapping one center for another, you have the natural frequency response of one speaker versus another. I mean, very often speakers that claim to play lower than other speakers, one way they do that is by actually putting in a little bit of a boost in the bass, so that its minus 3 dB point will be lower, right? But they artificially boosted maybe around 200 hertz or something like that. And you kicked it up just a little so that it could play a little bit lower. But even if that isn't the case, you have different responses on the low end, and then you have the whole crossover plus the EQ. Because you got to remember, if you have an EQ system that was trying to smooth it all out, and you set that for one speaker but then not the other, then what did it do to the first speaker that might not be
this is Infinite Gary. He's been listening to this podcast a long time. I'd like to think he would know. You'd have to run your calibration program.
Well, this is always an interesting thing of attribution, right? Because this comes up so often where people attribute what they hear or see to the thing that they're most aware of, or the spec that they were looking at, whereas really it's something else or a combination of a bunch of things. And that can be difficult because you're saying, is there an easy way for me to look at a spec sheet and know what this is going to sound like in my room?
Not exactly, no.
There really isn't, because there's so much more at play. Yeah,
because just because it can play lower doesn't make it louder at all bass frequencies. It just means it's flatter down to those lower ones. So it shouldn't.
In an anechoic chamber, no less. Right?
Yes.
You get it into your room and placement becomes a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there is a lot more at play here, Gary, and for anyone else who's wondering the same thing, because it is difficult. You're trying to make a comparison. Let's say you're doing an audition. You're bringing in several different speakers and you just want to compare them to one another. It's a heck of a thing when the thing that stands out, and it's very frequently the bass that stands out the most.
Yes. Yeah.
But the reason the bass stands out the most is because it interacts with your room the most. So a funny thing, I mean, this is a good point. When I audition speakers and I'm comparing, let's say I'm comparing 3 bookshelf speakers to each other, I set a crossover in my AV receiver. I do not have my subwoofers playing.
Mm-hmm.
I set a crossover, and I set a high crossover. I set like 150, maybe 200 hertz. Mm-hmm. I am trying to take out the variable of how much these speakers are exciting the room. And I'm hearing this difference in the bass, because the real difference I want to hear is in the mid-range and the treble, because my bass is going to be handled by my subwoofers anyway.
Okay.
So I want to remove that variable from the comparison rather than focusing on it, because it's a variable that isn't necessarily attributable to the speaker. It's attributable to the speaker plus the room.
Plus the room. Yeah. Right. It's all one system.
Yeah. So Jefferson, he recently purchased the Marantz AV 7702 Mark II. That is their pre-amplifier, pre-pro. Has no amplifiers built in, has XLR outputs, 11 speaker capable. So that's
nice.
It's a big boy. Now he was trying out of various surround up mixing modes because he's like, hey, I got a whole bunch of 5.1 and 2.0 and 7.1 content, not a whole lot of actual discrete Atmos content yet.
That's true.
He's like, okay, I've got this Dolby Surround Up mixer that activates my overhead speakers, but of course, lots of Blu-rays are DTS HD master audio, not Dolby True HD, right? So he's sending out the bit stream from his Blu-ray player. He's like, all right, DTS HD master audio lights up on my front display of my Marantz Pre-Pro, but I can't activate Dolby Surround Up mixer. I can activate the Odyssey DSX expansion mode. He also couldn't find DTS Neural X, which is mentioned in the manual. He's like, what's going on? Is he making a mistake here?
I do not know.
Oh, Jefferson. And I'm glad you asked this question because it's going to be affecting a lot of us. It affects me at the moment with my setup. I have an SR7010 AV receiver, which has all the same features as this Pre-Pro, but just has amps built in instead and no XLR outputs. Oh, DTS. DTS has basically screwed us all over by not having their DTS X update ready yet.
Oh, well, there you go.
Here's what happened. Last year, if you bought a receiver that could do Atmos, there were no AV receivers or Pre-Pros other than the flagship Denon and Marantz or the crazy $20,000 models from other companies. But other than those very select few, very expensive units, there were no models last year in 2014 that could do DTS X at all. It just wasn't a possibility.
Okay.
And you could apply the Dolby Surround Up mixer to anything on those models, including DTS HD master audio bit streams. So it all worked. And we were like, yay, I can use Dolby Surround mixer for everything. This year, 2015, DTS was like, oh yeah, we're going to have DTS X ready. And when we release DTS X, it's going to be a firmware update. And part of that firmware update will also be this new upmixer called DTS Neural X. And it's basically the equivalent of the Dolby Surround upmixer. It's just DTS's version.
Okay.
So DTS Neural X can take 2-channel 5.1, 7.1 and upmix it to make use of the overhead speakers too. Your top fronts and top rears or whatever the heck you have up there on your ceiling. But they said, hey, since we're going to be doing this, guess what? Neural X is only going to work with DTS bit streams. And since we're going to have Neural X, there's no reason for Dolby Surround to also work on DTS bit streams. So how about you just limit that so that Dolby Surround Up mixer only works with Dolby bit streams? And that's the situation we have.
So they just stole it from Dolby, basically.
Essentially. Now, they're going to be equivalent when the update comes out, and it eventually will. We don't know when. But eventually, when it does, then when you're playing a DTS HD Master Audio Blu-ray, you'll use the DTS Neural X upmixer for that. When you're playing a Dolby True HD Blu-ray, you'll use the Dolby Surround upmixer for that. But they are not cross-pollinating. You can't use Neural X for True HD. You can't use Dolby Surround for DTS HD Master Audio. There's one workaround, which is both upmixers, Neural X on the DTS side and Dolby Surround on the Dolby side, both of them work on PCM audio.
Oh.
So if you set your Blu-ray player to do all of the decoding, so it is no longer sending out a bit stream, it is doing the decoding inside of the Blu-ray player, and it is sending out up to 7.1 PCM audio, already decoded audio. Then you can use the Dolby Surround upmixer on that. So you can take a DTS HD Master Audio Blu-ray, have the Blu-ray player do the decoding, and send out 7.1 PCM to your AV receiver, and then apply Dolby Surround upmixer to that. Now, can you see the problem if I set my Blu-ray player to do the decoding, Lee?
The little display on the front of the receiver won't say what you want it to say?
It won't say that. It also, if you set it to do the decoding inside the Blu-ray player, will not send out Dolby True HD bit streams either. It will also decode Dolby True HD inside the player. And guess what doesn't work if you decode it inside the player?
Dolby True HD and the surround
Atmos, actual Atmos, right? So the actual Atmos discs have
So you'd have
to
to
be set
switch
out as a bit
settings
stream.
back and
You have
forth.
to switch it manually back and forth.
Oh, oh, bleeding edge technology. Why do you have to be so much fun?
So I shake my fist at you, DTS. This is
Yes.
what I do. I shake my fist at you for putting this new restriction and then not actually having your software ready when you said you would. He asks, when will they be releasing the DTS X firmware update? We don't know. We don't know. The rumors are that Dolby and are that Denon and Marantz are very keen to have a beta version ready for CES so they can demonstrate it. But look at all the words in there: rumor, beta, maybe.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a little bit of a unfortunate mess.
Be
given
easier
that
to go buy another Blu-ray player and just set it to PCM output, and then have one that's set to
two of them,
just
one
have two
only-
Blu-ray players. One that
one
only
just
does
for
Atmos.
Atmos.
Yeah. I mean, that would be quicker. It's quicker to switch inputs than to switch those settings back and forth.
manually set it. But yeah, I'm sorry, folks. That's the situation.
There you
So
go.
we'll have to live with it until DTS comes out. Lee, how are you doing on time? Can you stick around a little longer?
I can stick around a little longer. Yeah, sure.
Well, let's try and hit as many of these as we can. You let me know when it's time to go, because I don't have Tom saying I have a hard out. Hard out at the time
Yeah.
here, so.
No, I'm pretty soft. We don't want to make the show too long, right? But
Sure, yeah. Well,
I'm good for a little longer.
before we hit the end, I'll just remind people, if you're enjoying the show and you're liking that we're answering questions, you can send in your questions to us. If you want it on the show, send it for sure to question@avrant.com. That's an email address that will go to our producer, Austin. You can also email me directly at rob@avrant.com, or our regular host, tom@avrant.com. You can come to the website, avrant.com, to see the links to all the things we're talking about in the show. You can join us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/AV Rant Podcast, all one word. Or you can join us on Twitter. You can hit me at First Reflect, FIRSTREFLECT. You can hit Tom at AVRant_Tom. You can hit our producer Austin at Austin Pond. And Lee, folks can hit you on Twitter.
At Lee Overtweet.
There we go. So there's our contact info, so I don't forget it at the end of the show. Rick F. He needs a new projector. Needs it.
He kind of
Because
does.
he has a projector. It's a Panasonic PT-AX200, which was a nice unit, but it was a 720p unit. He's like, hey, we're already up to 4K. It was 720p.
Time to move on, yeah.
But more than that, the lamp needs replacing anyway. And he's like, hey, these lamps cost like $300. That's
Yeah,
like
don't do that.
half the cost of the projector. And C, it got left on a stationary screen for a while. And even though
Ouch.
it's an LCD projector, you can get faint burn in, especially on an older projector. A lot of them started to yellow just a little bit. The LCD panels themselves started to yellow a little bit, and you started getting little ghosty images that never entirely went away. That's happened. So he's like, look, I got about $1,000 to spend. What can you recommend to replace this thing? He knows he's not getting 4K or high dynamic range for $1,000, but that's fine.
No,
What can
he's
we
getting a nice 1080p projector.
Sure can.
I think you're going to recommend the BenQ. I was thinking an Epson.
There are the Epsons, but honestly, you'd be looking at like the 2030 for under $1,000. And in this under $1,000 price range, I think the BenQ, it's specifically the HT 1075, or there's the older model, the W 1070. They're essentially identical. They just, updated the model numbers from year to year. I like the BenQ better.
Okay.
It does a little bit black levels.
All right.
It's 3D. If you want to do 3D, looks a gazillion times better,
Okay.
because it's DLP, and DLP does 3D really well if you want to try that out. It's nice and bright. It's got a little tiny bit of lens shift, only vertical, but a little tiny bit. It's got a pretty small zoom range, but still has some zoom range. But overall, it's just a very nice looking image for easily under $1,000. It's darn hard to beat. If you go over to the Wirecutter or CNET or anybody, it's their top rated under $1,000 projector. And we're not lying to you. It's a darn good unit. The nice thing about it is, out of the box, no calibration. You put it in theater mode, it already looks good.
Nice. Okay.
So
I'm
that's
sold.
a pretty big deal. Yeah, because I mean, if you're spending that much, you're not going to spend $400 to have a calibrator calibrate it for you, in all likelihood, right?
And by the way, Rick's room is nice looking, and his projector mount is already at a position where all he needs is a little bit of vertical shift.
That's right. Yeah. So I
So
think
that
that's the
works.
choice for you. Also, he's got a 109-inch screen, and his seating distance is. Does he have it? Actually, is. It's
I don't
not
think he has the
tremendously far away.
exact amount.
Yeah, it looks like what?
But it's close. It's not very far. It doesn't, well, just
Maybe
from the
10,
pictures.
10, 11 feet, something like that.
Yeah, if I'm guessing, I'm going to say it's like 10 to 12 feet at the most.
Yeah. So he's like, basically from that distance on that size screen, is he going to notice an upgrade from 720p to 1080p? Like, is that resolution going to make the difference?
I think so. I don't have the math in front of me, but I think you'll see it.
Here's the thing. There's so many other things changing about the image. You're going to see a difference. Whether that's all attributable to the resolution or not is sort of immaterial, right?
Well, it depends. Like, do you ever send a computer signal to it? Do you ever?
That. It'll definitely look sharper on text.
Tiny text and stuff like that would definitely look better. I think you're going to see it.
Honestly, if you've got a dying lamp, a little bit of burn-in, a little bit of yellowing, I don't really care if you went 1080p or not. Like, there's no reason to not go 1080p because it's so affordable.
Right.
Like,
you're just
going to see a difference.
Brand new projector is just going to look amazing. So
that's right.
Just get it, man.
Yeah.
Get that BenQ and have a great movie night.
So he also has an SVS subwoofer. It's a cylinder sub. It's going back a little ways, so it's the 2039 PCI. That's the one that he has. The PCI series became the NSD series, which became the 2000 series. So that's the lineage there. So he's going back a few model series.
Sure.
So he's got it located in the front left corner of the room, and we've said that if you're using a single sub, chances are dead center of the front wall is where it's actually going to produce the most even bass. Right?
Okay. Sure.
For all of the seats, and he's got a pretty wide seating area. So he says, well, you can't really put it there vertically because it's too tall. It would block the screen. It's one of the cylinders standing up.
Right.
But he could put it at the center of the back wall, standing up back there in the middle.
Sure.
But that's kind of close to the seats, so maybe he would notice it there. He's basically wondering, should he move his subwoofer?
Well, fortunately, you can just try it and then put it somewhere else if you don't like it. So my guess is that's going to sound okay. Again, I'm just kind of looking at his room, and I think that would probably be fine.
Yeah, it's. I mean, again, you're doing the single subwoofer situation, so there is no way to have all the seats sound perfectly even.
Right,
it's
you're
just
not gonna. Yeah.
not possible. When we say try it at the center of the front of the room, it's because by putting it in the center of the room, you're exciting the fewest uneven modes within the room. Like you're spreading the sound waves as evenly as you can from their starting position.
Right.
But it still doesn't mean it's going to be 100%. And it still doesn't mean that your primary seat is actually going to end up being the best seat, right? It might be the seat to the left and the right of the primary seat that get the benefit, right? So it's a little bit tricky to do a subwoofer crawl with one of these cylinder subs, but still not impossible.
Have someone maybe hold it with their hand so it doesn't fall over.
That's right. The other thing is the
I can picture it.
The cylinder subs can be laid down on their sides. That is completely okay. We got that directly from the president of SVS. There was no problem lying a cylinder sub on its side.
Wouldn't that change the character of the bass, or does it not if it's over on its side? Nope. Okay, good.
Do a darn thing to the sound. So that's one option. If you're using a single sub and you're putting it close to your seat behind you, it can be localizable. It is almost a magical effect once you put the second subwoofer at the front of the room directly across from it. And all of a sudden, as long as you level match them, it isn't localizable anymore. And it's surprising because when you just have the one of them, then it usually is. So the chances that if you put it directly behind your seats and it's kind of close to them at that case, you probably would be able to localize it. Like Lee says, nothing's stopping you from giving it a try.
Yeah. It's easy to move around. Well, easy-ish to move around.
Yeah, it's easier to move the cylinders around. You can just sort of roll them.
Yeah, tilt them and roll them a little bit. Yeah,
that's right. But yeah, chances are you might notice it if you put it behind you. So either lay it down or try a subwoofer crawl or just try moving it along that front wall and see if you can get a better response. But do not expect to ever find any spot where all the seats suddenly become even because that requires more than one sub.
I think it's time for him to get some good bass sweeps that he can play off of his phone or something, or something like that, and try the crawl and try it right behind you.
Yeah, and we'll mention audiocheck.net. That's where you go to make your own bass sweep. So that's an easy place. You can load it onto an iPod or onto your phone. Just take your headphone jack, use a 3.5 millimeter to RCA adapter cable, and now you don't even have to turn your AV receiver on. You can just plug that directly into your subwoofer, move it wherever you want, and play the sweep right off your iPod or right off your phone or whatever. That's the easy way to do it. So his last question: when calculating a room's volume, should we, if he has a drop ceiling, so he's got a drop tile ceiling, should we count the distance from the floor to the drop ceiling, or should we count the distance from the floor to the rafters above the drop ceiling? What do we actually use when calculating the volume of a room?
Wow. I would measure from the, this is my guess, from the drop ceiling and not the real ceiling.
Yep.
Because they are, absorbing, insulating panels.
And reflecting.
And reflect, yeah.
Basically, it's where does the medium transition? When I say the medium, I mean the material through which sound is traveling. Because sound waves hate to transition between mediums. If you create a sound wave underwater, when it reaches the surface of the water where the water meets the air, most of this energy reflects off of that. Even though it's going into air, how can that possibly reflect
bounces
sound?
Back down into the water.
It just bounces back down to the water. Some of it escapes through, of course.
Sure.
A little bit does. But a lot of it reflects back down into the water. Sound waves of all types, hate to transition between mediums. They reflect off of that boundary. So air meeting ceiling tiles. Yes, ceiling tiles are not exactly the same as drywall, but they're definitely different from air.
Very, yes.
So that transition from air to ceiling tile is a boundary as far as those sound waves are concerned. Will a little bit of the sound, squeak through the ceiling tiles into the cavity between the ceiling tiles and the joists above it? Sure, it will. But that is the boundary. So that's where you calculate the volume of the room. What do you say, Lee? Can we handle one more?
I think we can do one more.
Okay.
This cup I keep drinking from is almost empty though, so that's the question limiter right there.
That's our canary in the coal mine.
When this gets empty, I have to leave the room.
So Gary F on Facebook, this is not Infinite Gary, it's a different Gary. Gary F on Facebook. He would like oh yes. Oh man, I'm almost wishing Tom was here for this.
Okay.
Because he could go off on this a little bit. But
I'll try to have an attitude about it.
He wants to talk about cables.
Oh,
differences.
Lord. Don't worry, I can go off too.
Differences that cables can make in sound. So let's say Gary's set up here. He wants to discuss these differences and that he recently upgraded. He had generic power cables, generic HDMI cables, and he upgraded, I'm going to put in quotes for my effect, but to Audio Quest. He's talking about Audio Quest. They have their NRG4 power cables. They have their Audio Quest HDMI cables that they label as HDMI 2.0, and I'll get into that in a little bit.
Oh, and they come in chocolate and vodka.
Those are the names, yeah. Chocolate and vodka. So he says, look, he noticed an improvement perceptually. He says he started with just the power cable and the audio clarity from his receiver, which is the thing you replace the power cable on. He says the clarity improved by replacing the power cable. He says he had bass that was thumping away and used to rattle the door, and then he replaced the HDMI cable between his Blu-ray player and the AV receiver, and it no longer rattles because of the difference in HDMI cable. Furthermore, he was told that he had to upgrade his HDMI cable because he's got 4K, and that you had to upgrade from HDMI 1.4 cable to an HDMI 2.0 cable or it wouldn't work. He was
Does
told
Tom
that.
make this face? Does he do this when people ask these questions? Does he make this face where he stretches his face around and rubs his temples?
So here's the issue. Gary seems to be completely in earnest here.
Yeah, no,
and he's not the only person, right? There's
it's a
lots of
legit
people.
question.
There's lots of people who have said, look, I swapped out cables. I've been told there wouldn't be a difference. I didn't expect there to be a difference. I noticed a difference. Look, I'm just saying what I noticed, right? Lots of people have that, at least anecdotally. Gary seems to be asking this in earnest, but he's also asking our opinion, right? So I want to start with the absolute most objective thing that I can.
Sure.
Right? And that is on this whole business of HDMI version numbers, like HDMI 1.4, HDMI 2.0, and how that pertains to cables. There is no such thing as an HDMI 2.0 cable.
Thank you.
Go to HDMI.org, right? The actual HDMI LLC. Right there, they very clearly say there are only HDMI high speed and HDMI standard speed cables. There are HDMI high-speed cables with Ethernet or without Ethernet. There are HDMI standard speed cables with Ethernet or without Ethernet. But nothing in the licensing has a version number attached to it.
Right.
Never has, never will. They have recently introduced a new thing that they're calling HDMI premium high speed. None of the specs have changed at all between premium high speed and what already existed in high speed. There is zero difference in the specification. What there is a new certification program. That's what the premium pertains to. They get to put an official sticker on there and say, look, these cables were tested to make sure they meet the high speed program, because anybody can slap the word high speed on the outside of a package, right? Because high speed is not trademarkable, right? So anybody can put those words on there. They're saying, look, if it's premium high speed and it has the official sticker, then at least we know it's been tested.
They're looking for something they can license and nail down for sure to a certain specification.
That's right. But to Gary, whoever told you needed new HDMI cables for 4K, that is 100% false. That is just factually, objectively false. There is no version number attached to HDMI cables. So I want to say that first, because that is unequivocal. There's no debate about that.
Right. Yeah. So that's where you get to this uncomfortable point. But first, let me ask: am I correct in thinking the difference between standard speed and high speed on HDMI cables is essentially the frequency it can carry, and so it's really more about
the amount of bandwidth.
It's the amount of bandwidth. Now, am I right in saying that if you had a very short standard cable, it might very well carry any signal you want?
If I had
a really like a nice quality, very short 3-foot HDMI cable from 10 years ago, it could very well work fine as a high-speed cable.
It might. If it was labeled as standard speed, that means that that's all that it was ever batch tested for.
Right.
So standard speed tops out at 10.2 gigabits per second being sent through that, and it should have no errors at that bandwidth. High speed should be able to get up to 18 gigabits per second. But what they found is that there were plenty of HDMI cables that were, say, 15 feet long. They were labeled high speed, but because at the time the only test signals were 1080p, and 1080p never got up to 18 gigabits per second. And now ultra high def with high dynamic range and that, it could potentially get up to the actual 18 gigabits per second. So people were like, hey, I bought a high speed cable and I'm having signal dropouts when I play 4K. Shouldn't that work? And HDMI is like, crap, we weren't really testing them stringently enough.
So we can say objectively, because it is digital signals, and because there's no such thing as a different HDMI version cable, that when he says he heard a difference by using that vodka cable, that HDMI 2.0 supposed cable, that it is not the cable. I mean, we can say that for sure. And that's an uncomfortable thing to look at somebody who's probably a perfectly intelligent human being, but we are all human beings. And we are all susceptible to certain phenomena, to suggestion and to placebo effect, to hearing, to feeling, to smelling, to seeing things that either you just didn't notice before or you want so desperately to be different, and we're all subjected to it. It's humans.
Yeah. Let's talk about what could possibly change sending a signal through. Let's start with an HDMI cable, but let's say any signal carrying cable, even analog signal carrying cables, all right? So first of all, in HDMI, and in any digital signal system, there are no different frequencies being sent down that cable. Monster Cable talks about there being different frequencies. Other companies talk about there being different. There are not. There is one frequency in any digital system. There is a clock at one end and a clock at the other end. And those two clocks must synchronize, because the thing that is sending the signal says, look, in the case of HDMI, it's like, 3.355 megahertz or something like that. That is the one frequency. And that means like 3,355,000 times a second, it is sending a
pulse.
Something. And I'll get into this in a second, but it's sending a little signal at that rate. And that rate never changes. It is only ever at that rate. And over on the receiving side, whatever device that's connected to, it has a clock and it says, look, every 3,355,000 times a second, I'm going to look for a signal. What is that signal? And those two things do have to be synchronized. All right. If they are not synchronized, you get an error. You get a drop in the signal. You do not get a degradation in quality.
No.
You do not get a little bit of this or a little bit of that. It is there or it is not.
Yeah, either
They are
the data
synchronized
gets
or they are not.
through or it does not.
That's
So
right.
that's the thing about digital. You either have dramatic errors
Yes,
or you'd have none.
that's right. So in a digital signal, what is the signal being sent? Because there is no music being sent over any cable. No matter what anybody says, there is no music traveling only over any cable at all.
You can't take bass out of a digital signal with a cable. There's no such thing.
There is an electrical signal being sent across a cable.
Yeah.
And in the case of a digital signal, all that signal does is produce a square wave. It is either high voltage or low voltage, one or the other. Now, can you round off the edges of that square wave due to signal loss? Can you introduce additional interference waves from radio frequencies or electromagnetic interference that slightly alter the shape of that square wave? Yes, all of these things are possible. However, the receiving device is only looking for high or low. High or low, high or low.
Yeah,
That's
0, 1, 0, 1.
it looks for.
Right.
As long as the voltage that reaches the other end when it's looking for the signal is above whatever threshold was set for the standard, it is a high. If it is below that threshold, it is a low.
Yes.
It does not matter if it is rounded. It does not matter if it is slightly misshapen due to interference. It does not matter if it is weaker than what was sent because of signal loss.
Right.
It just matters if it reaches the threshold of high or low. And as long as it does that, it is perfect.
That's right.
And if it is anything other than perfect, it is an error.
Yes.
There are no degrees. None.
Right.
Absolutely no degrees in a digital signal.
It either works or it doesn't. And when digital signals don't work, whether it's audio or video, it is very, very obvious.
Yeah. So objectively, you cannot have the sort of difference he described created by an HDMI cable. And now he's saying, look, I heard the damn thing.
Yeah,
right?
and he did. But then you start getting philosophical. What does it mean to hear? What does it mean to perceive? What is consciousness?
Well, there's more
This
going
gets
on
really
than that.
deep.
Now, I'm not saying this is what Gary did, but I'm saying this is a possibility. And
Some
certainly
setting
many other people
changed.
do.
Yeah.
Some setting changed. There's a different variable.
Yeah.
Right? Because very often when people are changing cables, they change something else in their system too.
Yeah.
And then they listen back and they say, well, the other thing I changed was so small and the cable was such an obvious change, I'm going to attribute the difference I hear to the change in cable, when it was actually the other thing that you thought was too small. We've seen this before where someone records themselves playing a guitar through one microphone cable, swaps out the microphone cable and plays the same thing again, listens back and says, I hear a difference. It must be because of the cable.
Right.
No, it was because you were playing the guitar. And no matter how good you are, it was not identical.
That's right.
Right. So if there was some other change, no matter how small it is, that is more likely to have created the difference than changing the HDMI cable. The HDMI cable, if you had swapped it out and you said, the first HDMI cable I had, I heard pops and clicks. And then I changed my HDMI cable and those pops and clicks went away. I would say that could be the cable, because those pops and clicks were errors in the digital signal,
Right.
where there was so much signal loss or so much interference or so much rounding of the square wave that when it reached the other side, it said, I don't know if this is a high or a low, or it should have been a high, but it recognized it as a low because there was so much signal loss. And so you heard pops and clicks. Now that can happen with a digital cable. Right? Just like how your images can suddenly go blocky, or you get black things, or the screen gets completely garbled and turns into squares. That can happen with the digital cable. But what will not happen is slightly fuzzier.
No, it's not going to get but the treble was a little harsh with this one.
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it cannot. Now, on an analog cable is sending an electrical signal that is analogous to the original waveform. When the original wave went up, the electrical signal goes up. When the original wave went down, the electrical signal goes down. When the original sound got louder or quieter, the amplitude of the wave changed, and the electrical signal's amplitude changes analogous to the original sound wave. When those things go through signal loss or are subjected to interference, you can get degrees of change.
Shrieking, especially with long cables.
Absolutely. That is a real thing that can happen with an analog signal. However, we can measure the input versus the output. We connect a very short, tiny little cable directly to an oscilloscope, from the output device and say, here's what the wave is coming out of that thing. Then we connect it to a very long analog cable and connect the oscilloscope to the other end of that very long analog cable. And now we can compare the two. We can compare the two waves. And if they are the same, they are the same.
I agree. There
there
is an objective reality to the universe, and we can measure it, and it's called science.
And it is electrical signals that we can measure very accurately and precisely.
That's right.
Far more accurately and precisely than your ears could possibly ever detect when it is an electrical signal. And there is no music, none whatsoever, traveling across that cable. There is only an electrical signal.
That's right.
Now let's get to the power cable. All right? The power cable is not carrying any signal. None.
Right.
It's not carrying a signal. It cannot change the sound.
Yeah, the only time I've seen a power cable change the sound is if there was a 60 hertz hum because something wasn't grounded properly.
If it introduces a tremendous amount of interference because
It's
of a
extremely
miswiring.
obvious.
Yes, it is a huge, massive hum. The other thing a power cable can do is be way too skinny for the amount of power that is being
it can heat
drawn
up
from the outlet. It can heat up.
Which is
It
dangerous.
can heat up. Yeah, if it is way too skinny. That is entirely possible. But your electrical devices, your sound equipment, your video equipment, all runs off of DC power, direct current power. The power coming out of your wall is AC. It is alternating current.
Right.
What goes from the wall outlet into your device is alternating current. Inside of your device is a transformer and a rectifier that turns the alternating current into direct current. It changes the frequency because the frequency coming in was 60 hertz. It changes that. It changes it to DC power. All of that happens inside of the power supply of your unit. For the power cable to make some sort of difference in what happens inside of that power supply in the 6 to 10 feet from the wall outlet to the power supply is impossible.
Yeah,
There is no signal being carried in there.
Right. As long as the right amount of voltage gets to your piece of equipment.
And current, yeah.
And current, yeah. So
is
it would
all
have
that
to
is
be it would have to be the thinnest, wispiest thread of copper heating up and falling apart. That's about all that could happen.
Yeah, you can do that.
Melt.
You can choke the system of adequate power.
Sure.
That's possible to do, right?
Yeah.
It's attempting to draw a certain amount of current from the wall outlet, and it cannot through the teeny tiny skinny little power cable. That is a possibility. And then it will shut down or catch on fire. Those are fairly obvious problems.
Again, the problems are obvious. Fire.
But it cannot change the sound. There is no signal there.
No.
There's nothing going through it. So the question becomes, how did he hear these differences? Because we know objectively that the cables, the power cord, cannot be responsible for the sounds that he heard, the differences in sounds that he heard. So I would urge you, Gary, I would urge you with everything I have in the fiber of my being, because you are not alone in believing that this is the reason for the changes that you heard. You have to compare blind. You have to compare blind, and you have to do the comparison in a manner where there is not a gap between the comparison of A to B, of situation A to situation B. You cannot take 5 minutes to swap out the cables and then listen again.
Right.
And tell yourself, oh, I believe I hear a difference.
And it would be very difficult with a power cable to do a quick switch.
It sure would.
Because at the very least, you've got the time it takes to cycle the device back on again as you go pop, pop, and switch the cables out. Yeah. Or someone else goes pop, pop, and switch the cables out and doesn't tell you, and then see what it's not going to sound.
But the comparison has to be done blind. And here's why. Here's why the comparison has to be done blind. They have done real-time fMRI scans of people's brains.
Yes.
As they listen to two different cables, two different speaker wires.
Right.
And they are told beforehand, here is the generic speaker wire that you're listening to, and now you are listening to the $300 Monster cable or the $25,000 Nordox cable or whatever it is. Yeah. And they've done the real-time scans in the fMRI machine, and what the activity in people's brains changes legitimately. That is real. There is nothing fake about it.
And there's nothing embarrassing to say that you're a human to which this happens.
No, it happens to me. I don't care how skeptical I am. It happens to all of us. We are inextricably unable to prevent this from happening.
You know, I've been trying for a very long time to convince some folks we know that have a wine shop to have a blind tasting with wine and let us all just try to guess what we're tasting and guess how much it should cost and that sort of thing, just randomly. They don't want to do that, even though they admit it could be fun, but I don't think they want to go through the trouble to set it up. But, you know, this kind of phenomenon happens with every sense that we have.
That's right.
Because you don't hear with your ears, you hear with your brain.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what signal goes to your head. It matters how your brain interprets what's coming in.
And what is happening in your brain is perception. They are
That's
not
right.
separate from one another. So when someone says, I heard a difference between these two cables, we can show you objectively that what went into the cable is the same as what came out of the cable from both cables. That can be demonstrated objectively electrically. But you say, it doesn't matter. I heard a difference.
And we can objectively say you did, because we can put you in a magnetic resonance imager and go, yes, you heard a difference, but there was not a difference.
That's right. Your brain actually responded differently.
Yeah, but that's your brain.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's where I think I'm going to leave it. The last thing I'll say is that as far as signal cables go, analog signal cables, HDMI cables go, whatever it is, the only thing they can do to a signal is degrade it. They can't. A cable cannot improve a signal.
No.
It cannot make the signal better than what came out of the source device. The only thing it can possibly do is degrade it or subject it to interference. So if you hear a difference, and you can, there are analog situations where there is a legitimate measurable difference between what went into one end of the cable and what came out the other.
Sure.
But the only thing that can happen is that the signal got worse. It got weaker, or it got changed, or it got subjected to interference. And if you hear that and you say, I prefer that, okay, but you cannot say that it is better.
Right.
It is not better. It is worse. It is objectively worse than the original that was sent. But perhaps you like high-end roll-off, and so that was there. But in an HDMI cable, it cannot happen. In a power cable, it cannot happen. So, Gary, I apologize if that... Yeah, I mean, it can... That what I'm saying right now can create an emotional response, right?
Absolutely.
It can get someone's back up, right?
Yeah.
And I apologize if that's the case, because that is not my goal. My goal is to discuss exactly what you asked us to discuss and state the opinion that you asked us to state. And we are not in any way denigrating your experience. And we're in fact supporting that your brain really did have a change in experience, because that has been shown.
And let me tell you, if that brain response is very positive and your brain gets another shot of dopamine or whatever, you know, and you had a good time, keep your, you know, power cable that you bought if you like it. Keep your chocolate cable if you want to, but please recognize the science here. That you're getting turned on by your cool looking cable. And let me tell you, that chocolate cable, that's a good looking cable too.
And if
I love these beautiful cables.
If you really want to know if the difference is attributable to the cable or not, it must be a blind comparison. You must not have any idea which one you're listening to. Heck, you could have 8 back-to-back-to-backs where it was actually all the same cable every time. And what's funny is when people do that comparison, they still hear a difference.
They still hear a difference, yeah.
Because they are anticipating that, oh, there must have been a switch. They must have switched. So I will create. My brain will fabricate for me a difference. That happens too. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. We've gone way over time. I apologize. I'm sure Lee's cup is definitely empty at this point.
Yeah.
But I like that. That was a fun discussion.
It was. I hope we did not offend Gary F. But like I said, there's an objective reality to the world that we can measure.
Absolutely. Alrighty. Well, that has brought us to the end of this episode. This is what, number 460. Man, we're getting up there.
That's right.
These episodes. So, yes, Lee, thank you for joining me once again.
It's fun every time. Every time.
And we hope that Tom enjoyed his camping trip. We're so glad that everyone has watched or listened to this episode. We hope that you enjoyed it, got something out of it. We've given out our contact info a few times, so I won't waste any more time here at the end. I will simply say that for AV Rant, I am Rob H.
And I'm Lee Overstreet. Now go out and listen to something.
Alrighty, folks. Well, all two of our viewers who have stuck around.
Wow,
we will.
Two people stuck around that long.
We will have a short hangout after party. I'll be posting the link for the hangout after party on our Facebook page and on my Twitter account. So that is where to find that. So go to @FirstReflect on Twitter, or go to AV Rant Podcast on Facebook, facebook.com/AV Rant Podcast, and I will post the link for the hangout after party. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.